I'm sick!
You're gonna get your mind right, and I mean right.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
proceeding as I have foreseen.
For cats with vagina.
I don't need this working class hero crap.
Captain, if I push it any harder, the whole thing will fall.
Is it time?
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
We'll know in a very short period of time, but it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good.
I see issue with that. And again, hey.
You're not going to be able to insult your way to the presidency. That's not going to happen.
I don't know who created Pokemon Go, but I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokemon go to the polls.
I'm Ted Cruz, and my pronoun is kiss my ass.
So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires, what we need to do to create these jobs.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to put him.
Not good. Believe me, not good.
Hello, everyone. Hello, dissidents, rather. Good morning, one and all. Welcome to the Do Dissidents Morning Dew edition of the podcast. My name is Keaton Weiss here, of course, with Russell Dobular.
Hello.
We thank you guys all very much for being here this morning. 409 strong in the YouTube chats, and we got 198 filing in over on Rumble. Thank you guys all very much for being here. We had a very busy week this week. We had Matt Taibbi on Sunday. We had Katie Halper on Wednesday. Glenn Greenwald will be joining us today. We will admit him as soon as he arrives, which seems to be right now. There he is. Beautiful, perfect timing. So let's, yeah, there you go. Wonderful.
That's what makes him a pro.
Hold on one second. I'm gonna admit you right now. I see you talking.
That's a pro, man.
There you go.
As soon as we start, there he is.
All right. So let's welcome the host of System Update. And I got to ask you a question, actually. A true hero of mine. It's a great honor to welcome Glenn Greenwald. Glenn, great to meet you. Thanks so much for coming.
Hello, Glenn.
Hey, good to be with you guys. Know what I was saying when I was muted and I was stupidly speaking, not realizing no one could hear me, was you were saying beautiful, perfect, and I thought that was my introduction, and then you added the word timing, and I was very disappointed that wasn't about me. But I'm going to pretend that it was. So I
was going to add to your introduction Pulitzer Prize winner. Are you a Pulitzer Prize winner? I know The Guardian won one, but then some people say you didn't win one. Is that bullshit? Did you win one?
Yeah, I mean, in every sense of how the Pulitzer is done, the one award for the Pulitzer that's given to the newspaper is the Public Service Award, but then they list the articles that are responsible for that award, and I was the lead reporter on them. So typically the Public Service Award goes to the yes, to the media outlet, but it's also hanging on my wall, and it's by everyone's standards and those who hate me. A Pulitzer that has gone to me as well.
Who hates you, Glenn? Yeah,
who hates you?
People hate you. People hate you, Glenn.
I mean, a few. I hear that a few people do. I am shocked by this because I never hear from them. I've never seen them, but yeah, there are some reports that weirdly there are a couple people who don't like me. I don't know if it's true or not.
I mean, they've nicknamed you the bar mitzvah boy online, but I think it's a compliment.
Which is ironic because I actually was not bar mitzvahed, but
you know what's funny? I consider myself the most secular Jew in the world, but now Katie was on the other night, Katie Halper, and now you're on. And Keaton, I'm like the only one who was bar mitzvahed, and they only did it because my mother was crying. They agreed to bar mitzvah me.
Oh yeah, my grandmother used every single conceivable technique she could. She sent us to Jewish schools, Jewish but like summer camps for months every single year, hoping it would seep in.
It would stick.
And for me, it just never did. Yeah, but it was a good learning experience. It made me understand better the culture, the religion, and that's always a positive thing.
All right, what was your experience? 'Cause I asked Katie this too. My experience, because they sent me to Hebrew school. They kicked me out when I was 9, though. But it was basically Zionism. I mean, that's all it really was. They didn't even really teach the Bible. Little Noah's Ark, because kids like that, but just Zionism. Was that your experience with that? Like it was Judaism was Zionism, the way they were teaching it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I went to a public school, so that was a little bit different. Although there was a very heavy portion of students there who were Jewish. I think the overwhelming majority were, and so I didn't have religious teaching there, but at the summer camps that I went to 5 or 6 years, I mean, it was like 2 months of every summer in the middle of the woods in like Ocala, Florida, and I think one time in southern Georgia.
Oh, wow.
It was, every day, Hebrew prayers and learning Hebrew and absolutely being inculcated with the idea that Israel was the duty of American Jews in particular to support, to make sure that it's a safe haven for Jews, given the history of Jewish persecution, including but not limited to the Holocaust. So, yeah, I mean, that was part and parcel of all of the instruction that every single American Jew that I know, and I know a lot of them, had as their part of their teaching growing up. It wasn't a debatable issue. It was just something you were expected to know and learn.
Yeah, well, I just want full disclosure for you, Glenn, and for the audience. For every 30 minutes that you spend watching this show, you become 11.5% more anti-Semitic, and then
it's really weird because the minute I entered, I was about to talk about my grandmother, and I felt this surge of hostility toward her for the first time just from being in this room with you two.
It plateaus, it levels out after a day. Like it's like when you get a vaccine, it hurts your arm for a day, and then
exactly.
Okay. It's like that. It's like that.
The antibodies level out.
Yeah, right. It levels out. So just, in case Nikki Haley is tuning in and she feels anything, she'll have that available for her next debate performance. But let me start with a first question. So, I mean, I always saw you as more or less a man of the left. You've never really described yourself, to my knowledge, as like a doctrinaire leftist, but I've always thought of you as part of the left, and but because of the Democratic Party's sort of complete capture by Wall Street, the intelligence agencies, the war machine, a lot of populism, including left populism, has been branded as right wing. And certainly over the past several years, the core liberal value of free speech has been much more vigorously defended in right wing circles than in left wing circles. But since October 7th, we've seen the right sort of revert to some of its more repressive ways regarding speech. And so as someone like you who has paid a certain social price, but you've made good faith cross-partisan appeals to First Amendment values, can you give your current assessment of the state of free speech on the right?
Yeah, so first of all, it is getting a lot of attention that large parts of the American right, many influential politicians and pundits and activists on the right have become censorship advocates, censorship fanatics, I would say, since October 7th. But the reality is that this Israel exception for free speech on the American right has been around for a very long time. In fact, on October 6th, the day before the Hamas attack, I saw a story about the University of Pennsylvania wanting to ban some sort of class that was being taught about Palestinian culture. And there were pressures from donors and other activist groups to demand the University of Pennsylvania cancel it. And I went onto Twitter and I said, it's amazing that it was October 6th, that the cause of free speech on the right for many people comes to a grinding halt the minute they arrive at the Israel-Palestine issue. And it's important not to waive these principles because suddenly it's an issue that you care about so much that you don't want to hear dissent to it. It has to be a principle. And it's most important that you apply it exactly in those cases where you feel most strongly. And there had been years before that I was doing reporting on things like these laws that were enacted primarily by red state governors and red state legislatures, but also by people like Andrew Cuomo, that tried to make it illegal to support the boycott of Israel, which is modeled after the boycott of South Africa, designed to bring down the Israeli occupation, like the boycott of South Africa in the 80s was designed to bring down the apartheid regime, which was a form of nonviolent Palestinian protest. And the way in which the West reacted was in Western Europe, they made it illegal by declaring it inherently anti-Semitic. And of course, anti-Semitism is illegal in Europe. So they basically made it a crime to advocate it. But in the United States, where we have the First Amendment, the workaround was these state governors and these legislatures passed laws that said, if you want to be a contractor with our state, you're a speech pathologist and the school district hires you to work with kids with learning disabilities or speech deficiencies or whatever. You want to build things for our various agencies. In order to be a contractor with the state, you have to sign as part of your contract a vow, a pledge that you do not support a boycott of Israel. You're allowed to support a boycott of any other foreign country, Peru, South Korea, China, whatever. You're even allowed to support a boycott of other American states. That was what was so amazing about Andrew Cuomo doing this, was Andrew Cuomo had led a boycott of Indiana and North Carolina because of their trans bathroom bills. He did it by executive order. He banned all non-essential travel to those states by state employees. And then he turned around the next year and said, if you boycott Israel, we're going to boycott you. Now, the conditioning of state employment or state contracting on a loyalty to a foreign country or pledging that you don't support a boycott of Israel is so blatantly unconstitutional that I can hardly imagine how they were able to get themselves to do it. Thankfully, most federal courts have so ruled that. But that had a lot of support on the American right. That came from the Republican Party. So I always knew my newfound supporters and allies and fans and the like had a gigantic blind spot on free speech on a couple of different issues, including Israel. The problem is not the problem, but the reality is the Israel-Palestine issue had been on the back burner for many years. We really haven't been talking much about it.
Right.
And it was only with October 7th that it really came to the fore. And you're seeing this censorship fanaticism on the part of the very people who have spent years, who built careers pretending that they were so offended by it.
Well, that on the perfectly. Sorry, Russell, go ahead.
On the left side of this, or so-called left, we just saw this is really blowing up now, where they grilled the university presidents before Congress about whether calling for genocide of Jews would be a violation of the code of conduct of their universities. And remarkably, they all pretty much refused to give a categorical yes or no to that. They kind of fell back on what I think any civil libertarian would recognize as a free speech argument. They wanted to move it to, well, is it being acted against a person, like as harassment? And, to the public, that's a very fine distinction. It just looks like these university presidents refusing to condemn genocide. That's the way it's being framed. Now, I saw Sagar Enjeti did a piece about this, where I think he rightly pointed out that part of where this is causing a lot of the so-called woke ideology to kind of light on fire around this is 6 months ago, if the question had been about trans people, if the question had been about black people, would they have been as reticent? Because we've been, especially the right? They've been decrying these speech codes on college campuses and people getting canceled. And he made the point that a lot of Jews, like Bill Ackman, who have been on that side of things, they want the Jews to be considered one of the oppressed minorities. And he's arguing that their reticence is because they don't see Jews that way, that they might be in favor of blanketing them under verboten speech, except that Jews they don't see as oppressed. Do you think that's true? Do you think it seems like this has just caused a lot of cognitive dissonance around these issues, particularly at universities?
Yeah, I mean, just to show you, like, to illustrate just the complete confusion that's going on here. Yesterday, I don't know if you saw, but Palantir, which is a firm that was founded by Peter Thiel, that does a ton of business with the U.S. security state, they announced, and I had an argument with the CEO of Palantir. Actually, about 10 years ago, Palantir got caught trying to spy on me and do this reputational damage campaign against me because of my support for WikiLeaks, and they apologized publicly and privately. But they announced that they were setting aside 180 new jobs reserved exclusively for American Jews on college campuses who feel unsafe in their environment. And people like Ben Shapiro and Barry Weiss both went to Twitter. Ben Shapiro said, "Love this." And, about 7 hours later, after people were pointing out, wait a minute, Ben, you've been pretty clear in your disgust for racial set-asides and for the idea that certain things are held open only for Black people or trans people. Why are you now cheering because it's your group? He went back and said, yeah, you know what? Maybe these jobs should be available to everyone. But that wasn't his first instinct.
Right.
So it's a normal human. We're not machines. So it's a normal. We have to fight to make sure that we apply principles equally, because our emotions will lead us to want to not do that. That's an intellectual exercise or a moral exercise. It's not our first reaction. And clearly people like Ben Shapiro and Barry Weiss, when they saw that at first, were thrilled because they didn't realize how radically inconsistent it was with everything they've been saying for the last however many years that made them quite wealthy. The issue with free speech to me, or, diversity and inclusion, is exactly the same. It has the problem with all of these college woke programs been that they just don't include enough groups. I thought the problem was with the principle itself, with the whole framework, with the whole concept of dividing us up by immutable demographic characteristics and then judging us or assigning us rights and opportunities based on those as opposed to who we are as individuals. That was my understanding of it. So to now say, oh no, what we want to do is expand the list of people who get these special treatments and protections is exactly the wrong answer. It's the same thing with censorship. Oh, well, if you're going to censor, I want Israel critics censored as well. All you're doing is fortifying and strengthening the system that 2 months from now, when the issue isn't Israel-Palestine anymore, these people are now going to be supercharged and will go back to persecuting the same people they had been persecuting on speech grounds. And the problem is that the right-wing free speech advocates who have been doing this have had their credibility destroyed. Who will ever take these people seriously again when they pretend they're in favor of free speech? So what you want administrators, university presidents to say, I'm not going to punish pure speech. I'm not going to punish a student who writes an op-ed calling for free Palestine, for the river to the sea, or intifada. But if they go to a student's dorm who's Jewish and every day post, signs on their door, you fucking Jew or whatever, of course, that's conduct. That's going to be punished, but not free political speech.
Right.
We want that. The problem, of course, is that these university professors are the least credible people to deliver that message.
Yeah, indeed. And speaking of, because you mentioned, some of your new friends that you've made, on the right, you spoke recently, you sort of devoted a whole segment of your show to the problem of audience capture and how a lot of content creators, including and perhaps even especially independent content creators like us who have this direct line and this audience, who we can sometimes be afraid to cross. Like sometimes you take a position, you're like, oh man, I'm going to lose a lot of subscribers over this, a lot of patrons over this. And you talked about the sort of problem that creates. Do you want to talk a little bit about just how you kind of navigated that? Because I could tell, obviously, not only from that segment that you did, but from the audience, because I watch your show and I follow the chat. A lot of them feel differently than you on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this before. The first time that I ever had to do this, I started writing about politics in 2005. And I did it because I was opposed to a lot of the civil liberties abuses and a lot of the military actions undertaken in the name of the war on terror, George Bush and Dick Cheney and the neocons and all of that. And as a result, I attracted, as you pointed out earlier, largely a left-wing, left liberal audience who thought I was, they were cheering when I was attacking George Bush. I lost a lot of them when I then started saying, you know what, when Barack Obama does these same things as he's doing, it's not any better.
Right.
The kind of hardcore Democrats left me, but that was never really my main audience. And so that wasn't really a problem. The first time it really happened was in 2010 when the Supreme Court issued the Citizens United ruling that invalidated a bunch of regulations to govern campaign finance spending. And this ruling, 5-4 ruling, the majority ruling, was universally hated by everyone who, from kind of the Joe Manchin, like Chuck Schumer wing of the Democratic Party, the more centrist conservative, all the way to the left and everybody in between. There was nobody cheering that Citizens United ruling. My view of it, though, was that they decided that case correctly. The ACLU actually had filed a brief in defense of that position on free speech grounds as well, because the case was this case where this group wanted to spend money to produce a film critical of Hillary Clinton before the election, and we're told they couldn't. It's such an obvious restriction on free speech, like pure. And even though I thought money in politics is a problem, you can't solve it by free speech abridgment. And a couple of days went by and I started getting all these emails. Hey, are you going to weigh in on the Supreme Court decision? I was a constitutional lawyer. I wrote about these things a lot. I couldn't evade it. And I knew that the vast majority of my audience was going to hate my view on it. And I had
so
to
you
write
thought
it.
that, so you had these thoughts and then they started asking you to talk about that. So you hadn't spoken about it
and I
publicly
knew
yet.
I couldn't
Right.
avoid it. It was just,
Right.
I didn't have quite the same level of stature and security back then that I had now. It was a big deal to alienate a huge portion of my audience. And I did. I mean, I used to go to my comment section. That was a big part of how I built my audience, was by interacting with my readers. And it was 95% of people just viciously attacking me. I lost all respect for you. I'll never be able to read you again. And it wasn't easy. Your currency is people reading your work. And if you're going to lose, even back then when I was working at Salon, still the people will hire you if you have a big audience. And if you don't, they won't.
Right.
And obviously, I've been around for long enough to understand my audience. Of course, a non-trivial part of my audience are now MAGA supporters or right-wing populists. Not nearly as big as people think, but still a substantial chunk who liked my views on Russiagate and my opposition to the war in Ukraine, and especially my opposition to censorship and big tech censorship and all of that. And just my general view that Trump isn't some unique Hitler figure, but just a very kind of more result of our political pathologies as opposed to the author of them. And obviously, I knew at the start of this war, A, I was going to have to weigh in, and B, I've been a long-time Israel critic. And of course, I did not support this Israel bombing of Gaza. And I knew this was going to infuriate a lot of my audience who never knew that about me before. Because like I said, Israel-Palestine really hasn't been discussed. I mean, I've mentioned it, but people's emotions weren't high. So people didn't really notice that I was saying these things. And the minute you start, honestly, I would rather lose 90% of my audience and 90% of my subscribers than come home and put my head on my pillow at night and know that I avoided saying something I really believe, or worse, disguised or lied about my views to placate or please my audience. Once you start doing that, just stop doing the work. You've become a slave to your audience. You're not doing anything interesting or independent or worthwhile at all. You're just feeding people what they want to hear. But it's not easy. Independent journalism does require, by its nature, you don't have a large corporation paying you. You need subscribers, you need advertisers, which only come with larger audiences. We lost, I think, 15 to 20% of our podcast audience, around 10% of our paid subscribers canceled. Those are not small numbers.
No,
but
you
I
need
really
loyalty amongst your audience too, because you don't reach as big an audience as, Fox News or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Your goal is, the fact that you have a loyal, intense following, and that's how you make your impact. And when you break that, it's hard to get back. But honestly, the thing that I really do believe is that even though you will lose people the minute you start telling them things they don't want to hear on an issue they really care about, in the long run, people respect that more. And the audience that you're going to end up building over time is one that's going to know that they don't come expecting to always hear what they want to hear, but they come expecting that you're going to give your most honest assessment and respect your audience, to give those arguments, to treat those disagreements with respect. We put a lot of Israel supporters on the air. I've addressed their arguments as much as I can in the most respectful way I can. But at the end of the day, that's the audience you want. You don't want to be a slave to your audience. You want to have an audience that wants to be challenged. That's a much higher quality audience.
Yeah, and to me, as an audience member, I like shows where I don't know exactly what the host is going to say until they say it. That's why I like your show, Jimmy Dore's show. You know, we have cultivated a viewpoint diverse audience here that we are quite proud of. To me, as an audience member, that just makes the show more interesting. You know, but I do have one,
and it makes your work more interesting.
Of course,
because
right.
You're speaking to a wide variety of people, which means that you do have the ability to, you know, if some person who's on the left, who's a left-wing pundit, who has only spoken to people on the left, who no one on the right knows, who no one on the right cares about, who no one is sitting there every day bashing Israel, it's making no impact whatsoever. But if you've made inroads with conservatives, Republicans, conservative media, and you're going to be heard on this, and they may not all agree with you, but it's going to make much more of an impact, and you want that in your audience. You don't want to just cultivate an audience filled with like-minded people.
Of course. And just one follow-up to that, because there seems to have been this sort of rift on the right regarding the Israel war, and it seems to be a sort of triple split. There's the hardcore Zionist, camp, like the, Shapiro, right? Then there's this sort of more isolationist, like Tucker Carlson, this isn't our war, why should we be giving any money to this? And then there's the third camp, which is closest to the way Russ and I feel, which is not quite Free Palestine, but closer than those two, like the Candace Owens, even Andrew Tate told Piers Morgan, it's disgusting what's happening in Gaza right now. And given that the Republican base seems to, for the moment at least, stopped the Ukraine war, right? There was this populist anti-war surge among the Republican base, and they cucked the whole party. They dragged the whole party. Now Lindsey Graham is saying no more aid for Ukraine until we help ourselves. Israel is a tougher lift because of everything that Israel represents to the U.S., but how do you view the sort of split on the right regarding this issue, and is it possible for a sort of anti-Israel war sentiment to gain enough traction in the Republican Party among their base to influence politicians? Because it seems like the answer is obviously no, but then again, 6 weeks ago, I'd have told you that would never happen regarding Ukraine, and it seems to have happened.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point because, I've had this fight with people on the left for the last 6 or 7 years since the emergence of Trump, which was really the thing that really finally kind of created this big breach between me and large parts of sort of the left liberals in the United States, which is, their view of the American right is like a caricature, the same caricature that the American right has for people who are on the liberal left. They don't understand the other side. They don't think there's anything authentic about them. They don't think they have any humanity. And so they think, oh, this anti-war sentiment is all a fraud. They don't really believe it. And I know that's not true. Donald Trump ran on a platform and saying things that no one could have ever said before in the Republican Party over and over about the Bush-Cheney warmongering, about neoconservatism and their toxicity and their evils. And it created this absolute sentiment. And by the way, Ron Paul was really the one who most exposed it. But you can go back to Pat Buchanan and kind of Ross Perot. You've seen this on the American right for a while. It took someone like Trump to really bring it to the fore. But there's absolutely way more space on the American right than there has been in a long, long time, probably in my lifetime, for an anti-war discourse, for the idea that war is usually fought for the benefit of global elites, never benefiting the lives of ordinary people. It's immoral. It sucks in all this money to enrich, the Boeings and the Raytheons of the world. And as you say, Israel is a different story, in part because you have a lot of evangelical Christians who are fanatical about Israel for cultural and religious reasons. You have American Jews, you have the national security state, all these factions. But I do think it's so notable that major voices on the American right, like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, have been willing to come forward and deviate on Israel. I can't remember the last time that happened.
Right.
You only had Ron Paul, and he was, go back and watch those 2008, 2012 debates where he would say these things. And the booing that erupted.
Forget it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is the hard work where you try and create common ground with the other side, with, different people. And it's not quick. It's not immediate. It's not easy. Obviously, most Republicans do support the American war effort in Israel, the U.S. support for the Israeli war and the Israeli war itself for a lot of reasons. But you create these openings and it grows. And I think the thing on Ukraine is so important. Because also what happens is war propaganda is extremely potent. It's a science. It's been developed over decades. And it's so easy at the start of any new war to just get people's emotions really jacked up. You know, you show them Ukrainian grandmothers weeping about their family who was killed in an airstrike in a building. You know, it's very easy to get people just based on what you show them and what you don't show them very riled up. But then over time, people start asking themselves, wait a minute, why are we supporting this war? Why am I watching all these dead Palestinian babies day after day after day that we're paying for? Like, and it's a gradual, slow process. And Ukraine is the perfect example where there is no question this war would have gone on for many more years had it not been for the American right. The American right was the only place where opposition to the war in Ukraine had any meaningful representation, certainly in the Congress. And it has grown and grown and grown. In less than 2 years, it is now almost stopping the American war machine, the military-industrial complex's ability to continue with this war that, of course, they want to continue. And Israel is a much harder lift, as you say, but I do believe that over time, this is the first time that a lot of Americans are getting the real look at Israel, the U.S. relationship to Israel, how Israel treats the Palestinians. You know, a lot of people who are young didn't pay attention to politics over the until recently. A lot of people didn't pay attention until Trump. And I think there's a lot of people now questioning, and that you have, you know, major right-wing thought leaders who are creating that space is kind of giving the green light to people to start questioning these things in a way they never would have done 10 years ago.
Do you believe I'm assuming you do, in the Palestinian right to return? And if you do, can Israel be maintained as a Jewish state? And can a Jewish state be anything other than an apartheid state, particularly in that region?
I think we have to have kind of a parallel discourse on this. One is just like, what would the ideal world look like? And then the other is, what does our real world look like? So in the ideal world, I would absolutely question why we need an ethno-state where Jewish supremacy is the defining national value. We can have that debate. It's a super abstract, interesting debate about the ideology of Zionism that, by the way, didn't exist until the early 20th century when it was created. And it was very controversial at the time. It took a lot of years for them to convince people to support it. But then there's the real world where Israel is armed to the teeth. It's one of the most advanced and sophisticated militaries in the world. It has the backing of huge amounts of powerful factions, beginning with the United States. And that country is not going anywhere. That's just the reality. And as a result, people who care about the Palestinian cause, in my view, should be focused on solutions that accept that reality. Because if you don't, you're going to be pursuing these lofty sounding ideas that might make you feel good, but that don't do anything for the Palestinian people. They want these maximalists. That's why Netanyahu propped up Hamas. He wants the Palestinian cause to be about eliminating Israel. And so I don't think that any solution that involves the elimination of the state of Israel as a Jewish state is a viable one. The question is, well, what is viable? Because you would need a civil war to remove those Israeli settlers. And without the removal of those Israeli settlers, the two-state solution is impossible. But at some point, you know, and this is what U.S. national security officials and Pentagon officials and generals have said, the failure for a two-state solution is a direct threat to American national security. It's a major reason why our interests in the Middle East are endangered, why American citizens are in danger of violent attack in the United States, wherever they travel. And it is in our national security to make it possible to have a two-state solution, a Palestinian state next to an Israeli state living in peace. And if that means the forceful removal of Israeli settlers, then I think that is what is going to happen.
All right. To shift gears a little bit out of the very depressing quagmire. It is
not a fun topic.
Well, it is. I mean, some of what you're saying, if you look at the map that's really gone around a lot since this broke out, of the way, like, clearly Israel has been, there's an expression in Hebrew that translates as establishing facts in the field. It's basically the equivalent of better to ask forgiveness than permission. And it just seems like that's been their policy for decades, to slowly strangle out the Palestinian territories until there just aren't enough Palestinians left in that territory to assert state rights. It just seems like they're going to continue to do that. Like the world can just say whatever it wants. I mean, clearly, they're just committing this slow motion genocide in front of cameras that they have to know they're taking tremendous amounts of public relation damage, as you say. I mean, people who never even questioned Israel now are, just becoming vehemently anti-Israel. So it's hard to imagine how you would even get there, because it seems like they're really not honest actors, funding Hamas, right? Like, they don't want another state there. They want a pretense not to have one.
Yeah, I think there's a few aspects to this. I had a debate last night that I hosted on my show with Omar Badar, who's a defender of Palestinian rights, and then Batya Ungar Sargon, who is a defender of the Israeli war. And one of the reasons I like Batya, and one of the reasons I have had her on my show a couple times and wanted to host this debate, is because I actually think she's like an ethical person. She values Palestinian life. I think it genuinely pains her to see Palestinians being killed, which is not the case for many Israel supporters. But the problem is, the Israel that she is describing and advocating for and wishing existed is not the Israel that exists.
Right.
It's not the Batyas of the world that are prosecuting the war in Gaza, and it's not the Batyas of the world who are administering the occupation in the West Bank that's becoming increasingly brutal and violent, by the way, over the last 2 months as well. I mean, in horrific ways that don't get a lot of attention because it's not on the same scale as Gaza. And the reality of the Israeli government has changed. I mean, it was never this bastion of, Western liberalism, but especially when it came to the Palestinian question. But, they had Yitzhak Rabin, who gave his life to try and forge a peace deal with the Palestinians. There's no more Yitzhak Rabins in Israel in power. The demographics of Israel have shifted. They become far more religious extremists. They are far more right-wing on the question of the Palestinians. They don't believe that there is such a thing as Gaza or the West Bank. That's why Ron DeSantis has taken now to calling it Judea and Samaria, because, sorry, I almost the Portuguese, because that's the term, of course, used for those people who think that the West Bank is really part of Greater Israel.
Right.
This is the reality of the Israeli government. And Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister before Benjamin Netanyahu, probably a little more hardline even than Netanyahu, wrote an essay in The Economist at the start of the war where he didn't pretend that the point of the war was to destroy Hamas or fight terrorism or whatever. He said the point of the war is to be so unhinged, so wild in what we do that it's going to shock the world, and that's going to put fear in the hearts of Israel's enemies for generations. So even though they're going to hate us more than ever, they're going to be too scared to do anything against us because they see now what we're capable of doing to them if they try, which is the mindset of terrorists.
Full Nixon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I really honestly prefer the more candid ones who say things like Mark Levin said this week, that there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian civilian. There's clearly a component of Israeli officials and their supporters in the United States, their most fanatical ones, by no means all, but some, who just don't value Arab and Muslim life. They think Arab and Muslims are inferior. They think they're subhuman. One of the reasons I remember early on when France early on announced a ban on Palestinian protests, and Dave Rubin, who has absolutely built his career pretending to defend free speech and free discourse and free thought and all that, claiming the West is collapsing because it doesn't have values of liberalism any longer, went onto Twitter, and above the news story that France had banned all pro-Palestinian protests, you're still allowed to have pro-Israel protests, just not pro-Palestinian protests, he said, oh, maybe the West can be saved after all.
Right.
And at first I thought to myself,
idiot.
This is like the most grotesque and explicit act of hypocrisy I've ever seen. How does a human brain even permit someone to do that?
Right.
But then what I realized was I was actually looking at it from the wrong perspective. He wasn't seeing that story as a free speech question. He sees Muslims as this horde of, mongrels and savages and barbarians who just need to be destroyed and repressed and controlled. And he saw that French announcement, as finally the West is starting to suppress the Palestinians or the Arabs as the way they should. And so when you have that kind of tribalism at play, and let's be honest, like there's a huge number of journalists and pundits and people in business and people in powerful factions of the United States who are not only Jewish, but very, very loyal to and supportive of Israel, who are constantly spreading this. I mean, the funniest thing is there was about a month before the Hamas attack, there was this college girl who was Jewish, and she did a TikTok video where her friend had brought over her friend from college. She brought her friend over, like you do when you're in college. You bring your friends to the dorms of your other friends, and he was Palestinian. And she freaked out. She was like, how does this girl not know? This guy wants to literally kill me. And of course, like, people reacted with horror. It was racist. It was all these things. And she got canceled. She closed all her social media accounts. I think she had discipline at her school. And her only mistake was if she had only waited a month until after the October 7th attack, she would have been called before Congress and held up as like a martyr. Like, this girl suffered a Palestinian visiting her dorm room. Imagine how unsafe she feels. There's a lot of that sentiment. And so you know, when you say to people, these Hamas figures are accurate, the Ministry of Health in Gaza has always given accurate numbers. In fact, there's probably way more Palestinians that have been killed from Israeli actions than only 15,000. The more honest ones will say, good, I want more of them. Remember, Nikki Haley was like, finish them, which of course was a way of saying, just don't have any regard for human life. And that's what the more honest people on the American right, and even a lot of Democratic supporters of Israel, really do believe. And what they'll say in private, and what I've heard them say many times, that's a big part of what's going on here. And that's what makes it so depressing.
Well, Douglas Murray has been really emblematic of that, because, you know, he was so masterful in those monk debates with Taibbi. And, you know, I mean, for me personally, I have his book, and, you know, I agreed with a lot of what he said, but this was a real mask off moment for a lot of these people who claim to be defending those Enlightenment values that really they are the Western chauvinists that they've been accused of being for all these years. Right. As soon as this broke out, immediately it became the Muslim hordes need to be driven out of the West.
Well, yeah, when Bill Maher and Ben Affleck and Sam Harris went at it, and Bill Maher and Sam Harris kept insisting, no, we're not criticizing Muslims as people, we're only criticizing their ideas. And at the time, I bought that. It seemed like a reasonable argument. But in hindsight, you know, whatever you think about the intellectual, rigor of Ben Affleck, he sniffed them out for who they were. They weren't just talking about ideas. They were saying that because they have bad ideas, the West has carte blanche to do with them what they want. That's obviously where they were coming from, as evidenced by Bill Maher. Right. The first words out of Bill Maher's mouth after, you know, bombs rained down on northern Gaza were, you're really going to defend these people who are, you know, anti-gay, anti-choice? Like, that's where they're coming from. They're saying because they don't share our values, it is okay to slaughter them en masse. I mean, that's his point.
Yeah, I love the newfound right-wing obsession with the cause of LGBT equality. It's so amazing.
Exactly, yeah.
But, you know, this is a thing that I remember in 2005, 2006, when I first was writing about American politics and the Iraq War was going on. All of a sudden, there was this huge spate of news articles about the Iranian government's abuse of gay men. They hang them from cranes. They, like, you know, beat them in public. And then I saw these neocons like Bill Kristol and those types who were trying to get the United States to go back to Tehran and do to Iran what we had just done to Iraq. And they started using that as a cudgel. You know, we're in bed with Saudi Arabia and Egyptian dictators in these Gulf state regions where people who are gay get the death penalty, and no one says a word about that because, of course, no one cares. This human rights concern is an absolute cudgel. It's we're going to go around the world now bombing any country that doesn't have enlightenment on LGBT issues. Like, let's get ready to have a war with half the world.
Right.
And, you know, that is, of course, I mean, I do think maybe for people like Bill Maher, he does see the thing that way. But I've had this feud with Sam Harris for a full-on decade. I mean, he recently went on a show and said, I'm the single most unethical person on the planet or whatever. Because I saw this fraud going on for a long time. I mean, here you have, you know, and again, I mean, I think, like, you know, a lot of this is taboo to say, but so many times it's the hieroglyphic that deciphers everything. I mean, Sam Harris and Bill Maher are both two American Jewish men who grew up in American Jewish households that were taught the same things we were taught, that we talked about at the beginning of the program. And just coincidentally, they both happen to have as part of their worldview that Muslims, the people we're taught since childhood to hate, to think is the enemy, are the enemy. And like I ask,
Right.
Jewish defenders of Israel a lot of times who come on my show, do you ever have this process of self-reflection where you realize that the exact thing that you've been inculcated from every direction to believe from infancy now happens to be the guiding worldview that you have as an adult? Like, do you ever wonder whether you're seeing this not through your own rational faculties, but because of the indoctrination and inculcation that you've been subjected to since birth? And it was always clear to me that Sam Harris was seeing the world as somebody who wanted people to believe that Muslims were inherently inferior, that their culture was barbaric and savage, that we had to be at war with them. And I think this is part of the thing that has been forgotten as well, is because of Trump, there's been this sort of space in this ethos on the American right that we don't like the CIA, we don't like the NSA, we don't like the Pentagon, we don't like what happened after 9/11 with the Iraq War. And there is a lot of people who kind of got convinced of that. But the minute Israel is the issue,
right,
all of that sentiment that was very strong after 9/11, that I have to say George W. Bush, to his credit, tried to keep suppressed, probably because I think of his father, that we're not at war with Islam, that would be the most insane thing to do. He, like, in that first week after 9/11, went to mosques and met with imams, to make that point in a way that I think was important and that he didn't have to do. That's one of the very few things I will give George Bush credit for. But there was a lot of those neocons trying to, at that point, disseminate this idea that this is a war of civilization.
Yes.
That
Right.
the United States just happens to be at war with all of Israel's enemies. All of Israel's enemies are our enemies. We're all against the Arabs and the Muslims. That's the real war. And a lot of that lingers to this very day. A lot of immigration sentiment is about that. Even though I fully share and support people who have these immigration concerns, because there are very real and non-racist reasons to be very concerned about the flow of immigrants, as Democratic governors and mayors are now seeing when they arrive on their doorstep instead of people in Texas and Arizona. But that is a big part of it, is that kind of civilizational war that is very tribal, very primal, has been reawakened by all of this.
All right, that dovetails nicely to my next question about Ireland. I really want to get your take on this. So Ireland's considering a hate speech bill. A lot of people are warning that this is going to have an impact on the world because of the limitations it places on speech and what impact that's going to have on social media companies, the way they're going to have to adjust their terms of service. Now, Michael Schellenberger in particular, he dropped a tweet this week basically saying this is military intelligence working through their proxies to gain control of speech, to gain control of the internet. And he was basically saying this is an all hands on deck moment for speech, that this Ireland bill has to be stopped, that it's really a stalking horse for military intelligence to take control of the internet and free speech. What do you think about that?
I think the greatest threat we face, if I had to pick one, is the effort on the part of Western elites and power centers to gain more and more control over political speech on the internet, which obviously is increasingly becoming the only real way that we disseminate information increasingly. It's one of the reasons why I'm so indignant with this U-turn that the American right has done, because this to me is the overarching issue. And I had an Irish journalist on my show, I think the beginning of this week, maybe late last week, Ben Scallon, who has followed these issues a lot.
Yeah, I saw
and
that.
The law in Ireland is unbelievably terrifying. It permits the Irish government to criminalize speech that they deem hateful with no definition of what that means, hateful.
Right.
It allows them to prosecute you not just for disseminating the speech, but just for receiving it, for being
right, for having it on your phone. Right.
And there's no real due process. You're presumed guilty. And of course, as he was saying, like, the problem is that even if you don't really get long prison terms for it, which is unbelievable that that's even a possibility, but even if you don't, you get branded forever guilty of hate crimes, of hate speech, like being a hateful person, a bigoted person, officially by the state. And that's part of the public record that follows you around for life. And I spent a lot of time, as you guys know, probably I live in Brazil for 18 years, and there's an effort in Brazil, and it almost succeeded, and they're trying again, to implement one of the most repressive online speech laws that requires that holds liable Facebook, Google, and all other platforms for any speech that they don't delete that the government considers to be disinformation or hate speech. And they have to decide that in advance. If the government goes and finds, oh, you allowed this post to remain online that we now deem disinformation, they can impose massive fines on these companies, like the kind of fines that even companies this rich and big will feel. And obviously the intended effect of that, and the inevitable effect of that, will be that big tech will allow no speech at all except the most anodyne, the most establishment supporting, the most power aligning. And every time one of these other countries, you can say, if you're sitting in the United States, why do I care about Ireland? Why do I care about Brazil? Why do I care about the law in Canada? The whole point is two things. One is every time one of these countries goes a little bit further, it now moves the line further back of acceptability to where the democratic world can go in censoring the internet and censoring political speech. But the other issue with it is that even though here in the United States we have a First Amendment, if these tech companies are now required to abide by censorship laws of the EU, which also has a very aggressive new legislative scheme, as does the UK, because the EU is a very big market. I don't know if you remember, but when Elon Musk bought Twitter and he was like, the bird is now free, the EU chief censorship official came back and said the bird will abide by EU laws, meaning you're not actually nearly as free as you want. And the idea will be that if enough countries outside the US force these countries to implement censorship frameworks in order to appease or comply with these other countries' laws as they interpret them, there's going to be no feasible way, technologically or financially, to kind of create a separate free speech version of these sites for the United States. So we will suffer the same amount of censorship as these European laws or Brazilian laws or Canadian laws impose and require. And of course, this is being done by the U.S. security state, Western intelligence agencies. Every time you dig into one of these disinformation firms that are the ones that are held up as sort of the apolitical, neutral arbiters of truth and falsity or what is hateful, they're funded by the same tiny group of billionaires and technology companies, but also governments. These are funded by the CIA and their MI6 and all of their adjacent organizations. It is absolutely an attempt for governments to seize control of our primary means of communicating about political speech. And if that doesn't terrify you, I don't know what does.
And that leads very well into my next question. One of the most terrifying things I've seen in my life is what they did to Steve Donziger. So for anyone in our audience who doesn't know, he was a lawyer who successfully sued Chevron on behalf of the native people of Ecuador. Subsequently, the judgment was overturned. It was Chevron opened a suit against him in the U.S. He's placed under house arrest. He went to prison for refusing to violate attorney-client privilege by turning over his devices to Chevron lawyers, and then they stripped him of his license to practice law. Now, if they can do that to Steve Donziger, can't they do that to anyone? Do we have rule of law in the U.S. anymore? And as a lawyer, and Glenn, I worry about this for you. Do you ever worry they're going to do something like that to you eventually?
Well, first of all, Tucker Carlson just interviewed, I don't know if you guys saw, I think it was last night, Alex Jones.
Yeah, I saw part of that, yeah.
Yeah, and Tucker began by admitting that he used to think Alex Jones was insane and malevolent, because that's kind of what was in the ether. And obviously, Alex Jones has made some gigantic mistakes that you cannot make if you want to be a dissident and hand people weapons, obviously Sandy Hook being the primary one. But nonetheless, Alex Jones is like the canary in the coal mine. In 2018, that was the first time big tech companies really got together and depersoned someone. They all got together and decided they were going to ban Alex Jones, and then shortly after banned Milo Yiannopoulos. And obviously the assumption was, as long as we do this to people who are sufficiently hated, people are going to accept the framework because they like it in this case. And before anyone knows it, we'll then take that framework and obviously start expanding it inward. And that's obviously what they did. Peter Thiel was on the board of Facebook at the time, was one of the very few people to object and say that, but he was a small minority of people who opposed it. And that's what happened. And every year that has gone by, what happens is that every time there's a new crisis or purported crisis, January 6th, Russiagate, the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, now this war, every one of these is exploited to say, this kind of speech that we don't like is too dangerous to permit. We need more and more tools to censor the internet, to punish dissidents. So you look at what was done to Alex Jones. He was completely wrecked. I mean, he has $1 billion judgments against him. Look at what was done to Julian Assange. He's rotting in a prison. He will never recover fully from what was done to him if he ever gets out at all.
Right.
So you look at what is done to actual dissidents in the West, in the United States, and you immediately know that all of these freedoms are completely illusory. They have all been eroded. If you're an effective dissident, I mean, thankfully, I haven't had the kind of thing done to me that was done to Julian. I mean, Edward Snowden's in exile in Russia, but I've been, there was a lot of reporting about what the U.S. government was trying to do when we were doing the Snowden reporting, including creating theories to try and prosecute me. The British detained my husband under an anti-terrorism law and threatened to prosecute him as a terrorist. There was all kinds of spying on us going on. The reporting I did in Brazil ended up in my criminal indictment. I was charged with 126 felony counts that would have put me in prison for, 200 years as part of the conspiracy. And only because of a Supreme Court ruling was that those charges rejected by a judge who made very clear he wishes he didn't have to throw the case out. And so if you are a real dissident, if you are somebody who is exercising your right in a way that is effective to spread dissent, you absolutely will be destroyed. And, it's a question of how much effect you're having and how well positioned you've been and how strategic you've been that determines the extent to which that will happen. But you just look at the fate of real dissidents in the United States, and you should have no question that all of those lines that we might have thought when we were growing up, and then even as adults before we started paying a lot of attention, would never be crossed by our country, have been blown past many, many times. And of course, if you're like Jake Tapper or Chris Hayes, you have free speech. Like you get to go on cable and like occasionally ask a hard question to a senator or whatever. It seems like, oh, look, that's like free speech. We're so happy to be American. But if you're an actual dissident to the like things that matter, and if you're having an effect on people, you're reaching people, you're playing around with their oil interests like Steve Donziger and the sanctions regimes and the attempt to control Venezuela and that part of Latin America, you just look at the outcome of where these people end up, and it's not really a mystery, the state of the real framework of liberties that we have.
All right. Well, that seems like an ominous note to end on, but a good one. I know you had about an hour, so thank you for giving us all
I
that
wish
time.
Didn't have to be so gloomy.
Well, do you want to do one more? If you have time, I'll do one. I'll do a fun one with you.
All right,
I have Trump's day one Hannity town hall. That's fun.
Okay, I like that. Let's do that.
All right,
anything with Trump is always humorous.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you, Glenn.
All right. So, much ado has been made of Donald Trump's, day one comments on his Fox News town hall with Sean Hannity, where Sean was really setting him up to sound like, are you not going to abuse power? Are you? And he toyed with him a little bit. So here's Trump's answer.
Go back to this one issue, though, because the media has been focused on this and attacking you. Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except for
he's going to prison. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border. And
I just nitpicky. What kind of posture? Is this just he's just a very peculiar man. What kind of posture is that to sit and do an hour-long interview?
That's alpha male shit right there, brother.
Yeah, it is. Like standing with one foot on the floor, like leaned over the bar stool. Very strange.
I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not. That's
drill.
That's
Okay,
not.
Sorry, I didn't want to step on it.
Day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not. That's
drill.
That's not.
No.
That's not retribution.
I'm going to be. He keeps. We love this guy. He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, "No. Other than day one, we're closing the border." And we're drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator.
So he says, I'm going to be a dictator on day one, meaning I'm going to close the border and drill. That's what he meant. He didn't say he was going to lock up opponents on day one. But if you look at so much of the media coverage about this is why I'm getting like major 2015 vibes. Trump says he'll be a dictator on day one. Legal experts concern. That's in the Boston Globe, The Atlantic. Trump says he'll be a dictator on day one, and then the small print, but not after that. This is my favorite. Donald Trump says he will be a dictator only on day one, then he'll focus on drilling. No, that's a complete misrepresentation.
That's actually not what he said, yeah.
He said, I'm going to be a dictator and drill. Drilling on day one is part of the dictator day one, promise that he made, if you will. And then you hear from the AP, pardon me, Trump declines to rule out abusing power to seek retribution if he returns to the White House. Trump sidesteps question when asked if he plans to abuse power if reelected. So, this reminds me of 2015, where the strategy to beat Trump was to denormalize him. And I always thought the best strategy to beat Trump, if you wanted to beat Trump, was to normalize him and just plainly say why you would be a better president than he would be. But this seems to be like the reaction to that line just reminded me of when he first ran and how the media just jumped on any little fragment of a sentence that they could to try and inflate this threat of this guy who's going to come in and just smash all the norms and the guardrails that they cherish so much until they don't anymore. What was your take on the day one comment and the subsequent sort of hand-wringing?
Well, first of all, it shows how fundamentally deceitful and corrupt our media is. This is an obvious point. A lot of people know this, but you just compare what he said to how they depicted it. The dishonesty is glaring. I don't even know if they know if they're doing it. They're just such like herd animals that the minute they hear one of them doing it, they all start repeating it. They don't question it. And then, and in fact, if you stand up and say, wait a minute, that's not what he said, your career can be over. You become the person of the day who's attacked on Twitter as a Trump defender, and all these journalists who aren't very secure in their profession, journalism is a dying corporate profession, are incentivized to go along with this. The other thing is, the time that I first started realizing that for sure Russiagate was bullshit, or at least the media's hysteria about it was manufactured, was when Trump stood up in that press conference and they asked him about the Russians, and he's like, hey, Russia, if you're listening and you like to hack, maybe you can find Hillary. And it's like they took that and pretended that that was proof that he had a direct relationship. And I was like, you people are so fucking stupid. Like, the idea that Trump submits his hacking request to the Russians by standing up in public in front of a zillion people with all these cameras, and he that's the way he gives his hacking request to the Kremlin, as opposed to having a secret meeting in a garage where he would do it, is the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. And I watched all these people in media and in politics who are pretty smart all convince themselves that that was a genuine literal request that he was making that proved that he had the Russians in his pocket. And once you see them do that, you can never unsee it. Obviously, Trump likes playing with this stuff. He's actually, I think his humor is one of the most underestimated political skills he has. And I think the most important point here is that the reason he can trifle with that is because he knows that most voters hate the political system as much as he does. So when he's saying I'm going to be a dictator for a day and fuck them over, the New York Times and CNN are like, oh my God, our precious norms. But most people hate that political establishment that he's threatening. And there's a part of them that likes that. That's part of his political appeal. And I think to this very day, these institutions of authority and power haven't fully internalized the extent to which they're not only hated, but deservedly hated. And it's the reason why you can prosecute Donald Trump for felonies in 4 separate jurisdictions. And his polls go up because people regard the justice system as fundamentally corrupted. I mean, it's a very alarming state of affairs when you have this breach, this size of a breach between the population and the institutions of power. That leads to all kinds of instability. But that's what we have, and nobody is better exploiting that than Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, every presidential candidate has a set of day one items that they promise to push through. That's a common thing. Everyone, on day one, I'm going to do this, that, and those are by nature dictatorial because you're not going to get a bill passed through both chambers on day one. So there's really nothing abnormal about what he said at all.
He didn't say I'm going to imprison David Frum and Maggie Haberman. He said, I'm going to close the border and drill.
Right. You didn't
and
say
then I'll be Democratic.
There's actually going to be a noose. There's going to be a noose set up right there. And as I'm giving my inauguration, we're going to line people up and hang them. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Nicole Wallace, I'm coming for you. Well, something more, actionable that they definitely, I think, are going to try to make a centerpiece of their case against him, should he be the nominee, is Project 2025. That basically, this is the Heritage Foundation, I think, cooked this up. That they're going to basically get rid of all these bureaucrats in the administrative state who last time held him back. And again, I think for the public responds, don't threaten us with a good time. Do you think that's something people should be worried about?
One of the main reasons why I was so opposed to the generalized anti-Trump narrative was because so often the anti-Trump tactics were far more authoritarian and threatening and undemocratic than the things they were claiming Trump was doing. And one of the leading examples of that was the reality that you had people in the United States government who were deliberately and aggressively subverting the orders he was giving, the policies he was implementing that were his right as president to implement. And the media was celebrating them. They would be like, oh, these are the adults, these military officials. Trump ordered troops removed from Syria and they just fucking didn't do it. And the media celebrated it. They moved them around. They pretended they did it. They invented reasons why they couldn't or why they would a little bit. And they never did it. And the media said, oh, thankfully we have. So when you have the deep state, the U.S. security state, whatever you want to call it, the military industrial complex, acting on its own outside of democratic processes, deliberately overriding the policy preferences of the elected president because they believe that they know better, that is a major threat to democracy, the real kind of threat to democracy. And if I were Trump, if I were a Trump supporter, I'd be angry if he hadn't have plans to do something about that.
All right.
All righty. Well,
let's let the man go. The dogs are barking.
Dogs are barking.
It's fun to watch. It's fun to watch how upset he makes them.
Yes, it is.
Glenn Greenwald, such a pleasure and an honor to meet you. Thank you so much for making the time. Everybody can find System Update on Rumble. You're on all the podcast players, and you're on Locals too, correct?
Yes. And you guys, I just want to say I've seen a lot of clips of your shows. I've watched some of your shows. You guys are doing great work. I'm thrilled to have been on the show. And let's keep the channel open.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much.
All right. Talk to you guys. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right. That's Glenn Greenwald, everybody. Thanks, Glenn, so much for being here. Thank you guys all for being here. 1,789 strong in the YouTube chats.
All right, so we held back on this the first time we interviewed Taibbi as well. So next time Glenn can get an earful of Maiden, but I decided to hold it for this first meeting. I thought he might, be like, "What the fuck did I get into?"
What the fuck did I do? Yes, exactly. But thank you guys all very much for being here this morning. We got plenty of show left. We have segments, we have super chats, we have some Rumble rants to read. I need a quick break. Russell, do you need a quick break? Should we put up a quick break, or do you want to go straight through?
Up to you, my brother.
All right. Well, I had a coffee and a water, so I need about 90 seconds. All right.
All right.
So
do it.
It's
Make
the morning.
It happen.
It's the morning. All right. Do you want to read some super chats while I go, or do you want to?
Sure, I can do it.
All right. So, Jake, if you can queue up some super chats for Russell, I'll be right back.
I mean, I just went to start, I assume.
There you go.
All right. Abide it. Oh, yeah. Well, with the Rumble rants, I don't know how to do that. All right. Abiding. Thank you for the super sticker, my man. Mick Dougal. Good morning, friends. Just your weekly reminder from the MAGA delegation that America First is inevitable. Well, man, I mean, I think we said some nice things about your boy today. Dick Shane, thank you for the $4.99. Any MLK colorblind society enjoyers left? McDougal, I'm gonna give you some aid and comfort. I believe most of us in America want that society. I think, as in many other areas, it's a very small number of fanatics, activists, and frankly, am more and more coming to the conclusion with a lot of these culture war issues, as many have before me, that this is all a freaking psyop, that they have elevated the most divisive figures and the most divisive ideas in order to keep us fighting. I don't think most people really think anti-racism, so to speak, is a better vision for society than one in which you respect people for the content of their character. That's why, actually, they always try to deconstruct that MLK quote. If you read Robin DiAngelo, she presumes to say that she knows better what he meant. And he didn't really mean colorblind. He's been misinterpreted. The nutty white lady is going to tell you what MLK actually meant. That almost as much as anything else shows how vapid that entire movement is. You're so skeptical of white people, and you're going to let some old white lady reinterpret MLK for you. You're going to let her tell you what MLK really meant. MLK was one of the great wordsmiths in human history. I think if he had wanted to say something other than that, he would have known how to craft his words in a way to leave no ambiguity.
Hold on one second, Russell, because I think you missed Pat Donahue's because this arrived before you got here. Did you read this one?
No, I didn't.
Okay, yeah, that's because I think you signed in after it came on. Keaton called it at the start. This was the end of Gaza, and unfortunately he's been proven right. There's hardly anything left to go back to, and there won't be any shortly, as the Zionist planned. Yeah, certainly there's not going to be much to go back to. Yes, so thank you, Patrick. Appreciate that. Dick Shane, this was $4.99. I don't know if you saw that one. Yeah, okay, so now we're at Penner. Hey, Robert. Hi, Glenn. You've been the greatest influence on my political philosophy. Seeing you and David stand up to prison and death threats was true courage. Will you write a book on David's extraordinary life? Robert, I almost asked him that because I know you're a great admirer of his. I didn't really want to bring up David on the air because I know that's obviously hugely emotional, and so that's kind of a personal thing. But I will forward him that question because he knows who you are, because you were working on that thing about David. So I will send him that message from you in private. My word to you on that. But thank you, Robert. Matt Volmer, thanks for the $5. Is there anything good to say about the Bush 2 era domestically or foreign policy wise? I wouldn't have anything good to say foreign policy wise. Certainly.
I have one good thing to say about George Bush. I don't think he was really able to get through all the logistics of it, but he really tried to focus on sex trafficking. And he was trying to prosecute Americans who do sex tourism, who go to Thailand to sleep with children. That is one good thing I will say for Bush. Yeah, he took that issue seriously.
I think what Greenwald was saying there was about the rhetoric of we're not at war with Islam. And I think, obviously the actions didn't match that because, what your rhetoric is doesn't matter when you bomb the hell out of countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. But he didn't do what, say, a Trump would have done after 9/11, which is try to whip up an anti-Islam fervor. I think that was what Glenn's point was regarding that.
Let me answer this. This isn't a super chat, but it's starred, and I knew that was going to happen as soon as I saw the way you phrased that.
Well,
what is it?
Let me answer it because this is to me. Because I started for that reason. What does it mean when DD says they're not quite free Palestine? Does it mean you're not quite against the current treatment of them? Make me understand. So I was referring to Candace Owens and Andrew Tate's comments on it. Well, I was talking about
not quite being where we are.
Right. I am. Yes, we are free Palestine here. Obviously, if you've seen our stuff, maybe you haven't before. Maybe it's your first time watching. If so, welcome. But yes, we are in the free Palestine camp. When I said they're not quite free Palestine, I was talking about the rift on the right. So you have three camps on the right now. You have the ultra-Zionist neocon Ben Shapiro wing. Then you have the sort of nationalist, sort of isolationist, it's not our problem, Tucker Carlson, Sagar Enjeti wing. And then you have the Candace Owens, Andrew Tate, who are saying it's terrible what's happening in Gaza right now, but they're not going all the way to say free Palestine, right? That's what I was referring to there.
Yeah. You got to remember when you talk on the air this many hours every week, it's all you can do not to say something that's going to get you automatically banned from YouTube, much less to always artfully phrase your ideas.
Yeah, but I mean, I thought I communicated that pretty well, I think.
No, as soon as you said it, I knew some people would take it that way.
Would misunderstand it. Well, I was referring to Candace Owens' point of view.
No, I know. But if you're not familiar with us, could read as they're not as we are against, it just,
Point taken. Okay, cool. Let's go to a couple Rumble rants, and then we do have segments. So we're going to be reading Super Chats and Rumble rants throughout the rest of the show. And we have, we got 4 segments to do? Yep. We should be able to get through that pretty quick, pretty easy. Crab Eaters Real. Every time the true populists come to contradiction with the partisans, the truth gets a little clearer to the people. Yes, it's a good way of phrasing it. These unprincipled shills can only fool us with bogus appeals to populism for so long. Yes, good point. Good point. Ernest Dowson today, flood Wall Street for Palestine, 2 p.m. at Foley Square, 3 p.m. City Hall, 4 p.m. Wall Street. Oh, so a nice protest going on in New York City, Lower Manhattan.
Nice.
This afternoon. Beautiful. Be there if you can. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, important to keep getting out there. Absolutely. Warren Westell lives on. Do your due diligence and read The Law of Nations by Emer de Vattel. The establishment of Israel and Palestine was a war crime. Oh, Jake, do you have the scroll? We're going to go to the scroll in a minute. Let's do one segment, and then we'll go to the Patreon scroll. And I sent you those names to add to the list. All right, so we'll do the scroll and the patron shout out after this first segment, but let's go to some news, folks. There was some news that broke last night. Hunter Biden hit with 9 tax-related charges in new indictments. This is NBC News. Hunter Biden has been indicted on 9 tax-related charges, including 3 felony counts, according to court documents filed Thursday in a federal court in Los Angeles. The 56-page court filing laid out a series of charges, including allegations that the president's son failed to pay taxes, failed to file, evaded an assessment, and filed a fraudulent form. The indictment alleges that rather than pay his taxes, the defendant spent millions of dollars on an extravagant lifestyle. The charges...
Shocker.
Yeah, exactly. The charges, which include 6 misdemeanor tax offenses, was brought by special counsel David Weiss. The case was assigned to Judge Mark Scarsi, who was appointed by former President Donald Trump. The maximum penalty to the president's son, maximum penalty the president's son could face, tripped up there, if convicted, is 17 years in prison, according to Weiss's office. According to the indictment, Hunter Biden engaged in a 4-year scheme in which he chose not to pay at least $1.4 million in self-assessed federal taxes he owed for tax years 2016 through 2019, and to evade the assessment of taxes for year 2018 when he filed false returns, Weiss's office said in a news release. The White House declined to comment on the charges and referred NBC News to Hunter Biden's personal attorneys as well as the Justice Department. The attorneys did not immediately provide a comment. A White House official said they learned of the charges from public reporting and did not have advance notice, and the indictment does not appear to reference the president himself or his role as president or vice president, meaning under Obama. So I'm always a little bit... I always feel a little cheap and dirty doing these Hunter Biden stories when they come up, because my take is the exact same. But I think now that Biden's polling has just totally imploded, I think this point is going to resonate a little more than it has when I've made it in the past, which is if the Democrats pulled their head out of their ass, they would understand that this Hunter Biden drama is a gift to them because it is the perfect excuse to get Joe Biden out of the race. Like, it is the perfect thing. They can't really say he's too old because they've already said he isn't too old, right? And they can do this in a way that not only takes care of the Joe Biden issue, but the Kamala Harris issue. They could say, look, this is a distraction, and we don't want anybody from our White House on the ticket because it creates a conflict of interest. It creates a circus. Trump is on trial. Trump is being charged. We don't want the Republicans to be able to throw that same issue our way, talking about all of Hunter Biden's legal problems. And so, in the interest of the country, we are going to step aside so that this issue is not a distraction. And boom, that clears Biden out of the way. That clears Kamala out of the way. Now you put Newsom up there, who... I don't know what chances he has against Trump, but they're better than Biden's at this point. Let's be honest. Joe Biden is a lame duck for all intents and purposes. So this is the opportunity. Like, this is it. This is what they can use to save themselves if they want to. They're not going to. But hopefully, now that we've seen Biden's poll numbers just totally bottom out, maybe this argument will get a little oxygen. Not that I have any interest in helping the Democratic Party defeat Donald Trump, but free advice if you want it, I suppose.
Yeah, they're completely fucked. You got a crazy, cognitively impaired president with Nixonian resentments of the elite power brokers of the Democratic Party that laughed at him up their sleeve his whole life, who refuses to step down. You've got a vice president who, if you ran her, would probably lose 49 states, if not 50, plus the territories. So there's no help there. No, really not. Not even California, not even her home state. She would probably lose. Yeah. So nonetheless, if you try to replace her, even a lot of the base of African-American women who don't like her are going to take offense at her being replaced. So you're fucked on that level, and you're already hemorrhaging black voters as it is. They just have absolutely no good options. But something you always have to remember when you look at stuff like this is, in the end, this whole system is heads they win, tails you lose. It doesn't really matter for them. Those people, it's like Bill Murray's speech in Rushmore. They were born rich and they're going to stay that way. These people, it doesn't fucking matter if they win an election. You know, it's just musical chairs. They're just trading off these titles for a season, and they go to their corporate boards and their corporate media gigs, and they'll be fine. They'll be fine. If the stakes were as high as they tell you they are, they would do something about this, but it doesn't really matter in the end for most of these people.
Yeah, exactly. And I just wanted, this is not a super chat, but because I've gotten some pushback on this in the past, how does this get rid of Kamala? I think they can spin that as an excuse. She is part of the Biden White House, right? And therefore there's a conflict of interest with her running while the president's son is on trial. Is that an easy sell? No, but it's a sell. Like, it's something. They have it. Biden's age doesn't solve the Kamala problem, because if they say, well, Biden's just too old so he can't run again, boom, she's next in line. You say this White House is plagued by legal scandal, and so for the sake of it not becoming a distraction in the campaign, we want someone from outside the White House to run. Boom, now you've solved the Kamala problem.
I mean, you haven't, but yeah. What else are you going to do? You got to do something like that.
Right, they got to do something like that. It's like, it's something. It's something.
Right.
That's an old Jewish saying. Hey, it's something. Right.
I'm saying in the end, they make more money out of government than in it. What do they care?
Right.
It doesn't even matter that much. They're going to tell you this is the most important election of your lifetime, every election. For them, it doesn't matter. It's just an elite aristocracy that moves in and out of, from government to corporate gigs, from corporate gigs to government. They don't give a shit. They're just either way, they win and you lose, no matter who wins.
Right, exactly. Shina Billy, Glenn is the GOAT. Thank you, Shina Billy. Appreciate that. Ryan Laverty, $4.99. Thank you, sir. What a way to start my morning in travel San Diego. Glenn Greenwald and do Dissidents. Well, that's early in the morning out in San Diego. It's still only 7:30 out there.
Oh, yeah, man.
It's amazing to see how you fellas have kept bringing out the big guests lately. Yeah, that's a blockbuster lineup right there.
Boom.
Matt Taibbi, Katie Halper, Glenn Greenwald.
It's like it just happened that way. Like Matt, you know, we have a relationship with, so we can get him on like relatively tight notice. He answers our emails. But we were trying to get Katie and Glenn for a while. It just so happened, boom, boom, they both came through at the same exact time that we were already scheduled to interview Taibbi.
Exactly. Yeah. And normally we like to space out the interviews a little bit, but with the holidays coming up, that creates like a gap where people aren't available. And we're like, well, we don't want to push it into next month. So let's just knock them out 3 in a row. And yeah, it was quite a week.
Which, by the way, Taibbi did a town hall here in New York last night. And I got to go out and meet the man.
That's right.
It was pretty cool. Well, we'll have some footage from that on Sunday. It was pretty, most of the people in the room, this was at the legendary Montauk Club in Brooklyn, which was an old blue blood men's club that now, I don't know, they do different events there. It's not that anymore. You know, he was taking people through the Twitter files and explaining what's so dangerous about what he uncovered. Now, he sent out a kind of tongue-in-cheek thing. Well, I'm in the heart of MSNBC land in Park Slope, Brooklyn. If you want to argue with me, come for me. There was only one guy who was clearly mentally unstable who went after him, and it created a bit of drama and almost a fist fight in the room, actually.
Wow.
But the rest were all, you know, supportive of his work. Most of the people there were fans. But it was very cool meeting him. It was very nice. I think he wants a tour from us. He was asking about our being tour guides.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we should take him for a tour. That would be a cool thing to do for like charity. I've thought about that. Like if we did a tour for like a charity.
Yeah, that could be something. That could be something cool. Jake, do you have that scroll queued up? There we go. Beautiful. Thank you, my friend. All right, folks, you can support this show by going to patreon.com/do dissidents. Our patrons are the backbone of the show. The scroll seems kind of frozen, Jake. I don't know if it's your internet, but it's a little buffery. But there we go. I see you've added the names. I could tell. Thank you. You can go to patreon.com/do dissidents and help support this show. Our patrons are the backbone of the program. You get call-in access to our Sunday evening Q&A, so that's coming up this Sunday. You also get access to 2 supporter-exclusive streams per month, as well as a shout-out on the show credits here. So we try to make the perks worth everyone's while, but please go to patreon.com/do dissidents if you like what we do and you can help keep us going. That is the best way to support us, is to become a member. You can go to Patreon, Substack at dodissidents.substack.com. You can also check us out at locals, dodissidents.locals.com. We have almost 500 people in the Rumble chat now, which is great to see. You can join our locals by clicking the join button right underneath the screen right now. For as little as $5 a month, you get all those perks that I just mentioned. And once we get to 500 paid subscribers, we will add a 4th weekly stream. We are just hovering the 470 mark right now. So we are very, very close. We could get there this week if you guys sign up, and we could be doing Thursday streams before the end of the year. How's that? So dodissidents.locals.com, dodissidents.substack.com, or of course you can go to patreon.com/do dissidents. Perks are the same across the board. But thank you very much for your support. Let's go to Jimmy O'Toole. Thanks for the $2. Appreciate that. Doc Terminus. I like that name. Thanks for having Glenn on. Anyone looking for a feel-good holiday movie should donate to his Hope Shelter Dog Rescue. Yes, he has a dog rescue, which is great. That's fantastic. So thank you for mentioning that, my friend. Samuel Bruce, thanks for the $4.99. Appreciate you. And SB, thanks for the $5. All due respect to Glenn, Israel has lost all right to exist with this genocide. Palestinians and other Arabs shouldn't have to live with these psychos. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think a 2-state solution is viable at this point. And that doesn't mean, for me, the destruction of the Israeli state, but it means the end of Israel as a Jewish state. It was John Kerry who said it could either be a democratic state or a Jewish state. It cannot be both. So John Kerry is hardly a radical. And so, yeah, I would say at this point, you can't have a 2-state solution where one state has proven its intention of cannibalizing the other state, as has been the case. Wow, we got another wonderful donation from Rosie for $100. Russell, do you want to ring the cowbell there?
Damn, yo.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rosie. We appreciate that very much. That's very kind of you.
It's going to be hookers and absinthe tonight.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's move on to our next segment. Here, let's do a couple of Rumble rants here. Master Yoda, President Trump's proposed day one promise is just bipartisan Democrat-Republican policy with fewer pauses between atrocities. The damage to working people is no different, no matter who's in charge. Yeah, no, that day one hysteria was just like the same as like 2015. And actually what Greenwald was talking about was right. That example was the right example to bring up. The Russia, if you're listening, as if that was an actual order and not a joke. It was just like absurd.
Yeah, no, that's how he conspires in front of the world media. Here, I can't figure out how to share this to my phone, but
I could tell you were
computer.
Trying. Yeah, there it is. Beautiful.
Little shot. I take a terrible selfie, man. I gotta remember just to have people take the picture. I can't. It's such a bad picture. I can't even share it.
I think it's a fine picture. I don't think it was too bad.
I look like I look like the paparazzi just caught me. You know, I'm like,
yeah.
I'm like very surprised, even though I'm taking the picture.
Yeah. Ellen, thanks, Ellen, for the $5. One, Keaton's hair is on point. Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate that. I hurt for Russell. He feels horrid. Glenn is a treasure. Thank you for the shout out on Wednesday. Do you still feel horrid? You seem better.
No, I'm all right. It's just like the aftermath because I haven't because we have a show. Like I there's only so much rest my voice gets.
Yeah,
I think it'll be completely gone Sunday.
And thanks for the shout out. We shouted out Ellen's Substack. She started a Substack, so I'll plug it again. Ellen.substack.com. Those of you who followed us for long enough, you know who Ellen is, and she has a Substack now that I encourage you all to subscribe to. So head over there and do that for sure. T-Bone, thanks for the $5. Glenn, you're an icon. Thanks for supporting Dissidents. Also, great jam session with Katie Halper. Loves it. Thank you, T-Bone.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to a little bit of Republican debate politics here. So we have two clips that we're going to play from the Republican debate, which was on Wednesday night, which we skipped out on. Here's a clip from the fourth Republican debate on News Nation. Here is Vivek Ramaswamy embarrassing Nikki Haley on Ukraine. Let's take a look.
I want to say one thing about the tie to Ukraine. I want to say one thing about the tie to Ukraine, if I may. So foreign policy experience is not the same as foreign policy wisdom. I want everybody at home to note that I was the first person to say we need a reasonable peace deal in Ukraine. Now a lot of the neocons are quietly coming along to that position, with the exceptions of Nikki Haley and Joe Biden, who still support this, what I believe is pointless war in Ukraine. And I think those with foreign policy experience, one thing that Joe Biden and Nikki Haley have in common is that neither of them could even state for you 3 provinces in eastern Ukraine that they want to send our troops to actually fight for. Look at that. This is what I want people to understand. These people have, I mean, she has no idea what the hell the names of those provinces are, but she wants to send our sons and daughters and our troops and our military equipment to go fight it. So reject this myth that they've been selling you that somebody...
See, he's artful here because he doesn't exactly give her a chance to say the 3 names, but he kind of does. Like, he worked the timing perfectly on that. Like, he did give her a chance to butt in and say, actually, I do. Kharkiv, Donetsk, Lugansk, right? I almost embarrassed myself by forgetting them.
You almost pulled a Rick Perry.
I almost pulled a Rick Perry there. But he did. But he moved on quick enough where she ends up looking like a real idiot. So here, let's play that again.
Well, this is what I've said. This is what I've said from the beginning. Vivek is the only one that has real skills in this primary. Like that he's good. He's good. He's got that thing. He's got that thing. He's got that undefinable thing. He's interesting to watch. He's charismatic. He's very, very smart. It was very, you want to talk about, we just got, with Glenn, we got really into how dumb as dog shit a lot of these media figures are. Early on, they tried to spin him as stupid, and wow, are you barking up the wrong tree. This guy is very, very smart. He's very smart the way he constructs these attacks.
Yeah, no, this was good.
For you. 3 provinces in eastern Ukraine that they want to send our troops to actually fight for. Look at that. This is what I want people to understand. These people have,
she looks like she's
no
going to
idea
cry.
what the hell the names of those provinces are, but she wants to send our sons and daughters and our troops and our military equipment to go fight it. So reject this myth that they've been selling you that somebody had a cup of coffee stint at the UN and then makes $8 million after, has real foreign policy experience. It takes an outsider to see this through. Look at the blank expression. She doesn't know the names of the provinces that she wants to actually fight for.
And she obviously does.
Donors right there. The donors right there that are playing her like the puppet master.
Hold on.
He flayed her. He flayed her. Look at her. Look at her. She's like, maybe I can get one of those sweet jobs at Raytheon.
Well, this is the thing. They have to go after her now because she has kind of surprised the field in making a real play for second place. She is polling second behind Trump in some polls.
And it makes sense in the end.
Would,
yeah, she's consolidating the Nicole Wallace
Project people.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. So she's not a threat to win, but she is kind of a threat to people who are jockeying for second place unless, in the event that Trump, gets locked in jail. You know what I mean? Like that second place spot is important in their eyes because at this point, I think the reality has dawned on all of these guys that they're not getting anywhere near that nomination unless something extreme happens to Trump.
Right.
And that can take a variety of forms. In East Berlin, we'll just say in case he's found guilty of something and goes to prison, in case the legal system does its job on him, right?
In case he slips on a banana peel.
Yeah, or in case he should slip on a banana peel, right? So that second place is an important spot, and she has consolidated the polling in the sort of opposite wing, the old guard Bush-Cheney wing of the party. So now they have to kind of tear her down for that. And the Ukraine war is a perfect opportunity for them to do it because the Republican base has basically cucked the party. I talked about this in our Greenwald interview, which if you're watching the clip version, go back and watch the interview. But I talked about this just a few moments ago. I didn't think it was possible for the Republican base to exert enough influence to actually get enough Republican politicians hung up over Ukraine funding, but they did. And so this is a great way for the sort of Vivek wing to differentiate itself from this sort of old guard neocon wing, which now Nikki Haley has consolidated to the point where she's now a threat for second place. In some polls, she is second place.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they are all competing to be the last person standing should something happen to the Trump candidacy.
Exactly.
But Trump's got the Trump base consolidated. So who's left? It's the disaffected Lincoln Project Republicans. So of course, out of this group, who are they going to go for? They're going to go for Haley. Exactly. I mean, Christie is just, he's just too sad a figure.
Forget it. Yeah.
He's the big pussy of this race. He's bound to get whacked in the end. So I mean, big pussy, the character, not the
right, the character in The Sopranos, yes,
not the noun.
Right.
Yeah. Who else are they going to go for out of these? It's her, Christie, and she's a more credible figure for them.
Exactly. Here's another clip from the fourth GOP primary debate. This is Nikki Haley being exposed for corruption. She was deep in debt after her stint at the UN ended, and now she has a net worth of over $8 million. And so here's Vivek and DeSantis sort of trying to make the case that she has been influenced by forces that the Republican base is sort of at odds with. They take different approaches to it, and I think this is a good sort of case study in the difference between a DeSantis and a Ramaswamy. So it's interesting on that level, and it's also interesting and fun to see Nikki Haley exposed for the tool of the military-industrial complex that she is. So let's take a look.
From earlier, that she is somehow not...
Sorry.
I want to go back, though, to Nikki Haley's comment from earlier, that she is somehow not responding to the will of these donors. Nikki, you were bankrupt when you left the UN. After you left the UN, you became a military contractor. You actually started joining service on the board of Boeing, whose back you scratched for a very long time, and then gave foreign multinational speeches like Hillary Clinton is. And now you're a multimillionaire. That math does not add up. It adds up to the fact that you are corrupt. And when I said they were bought and paid for, I meant the Republican establishment, not the Democratic establishment. Now you have Reid Hoffman, the person who's effectively George Soros Jr., funding lawsuits across this country against Donald Trump to keep him off the ballot, funding left-wing causes. We discovered this week that he is one of Nikki Haley's largest supporters. Larry Fink, the king of the woke industrial complex, the ESG movement, the CEO of BlackRock, the most powerful company in the world, now supporting Nikki Haley. And to say that doesn't affect her is false, because it's after that meeting later that day that she says that every American needs to be doxxed by having their ID, their government-issued ID, tied to what they say on the internet. So I think that this is far more corrupt than I even imagined when I entered politics. But I will say this. It is going to take a leader from the outside with fresh legs from the next generation to unite this country. Not the broken politicians who are puppets of the puppet masters, but the actual people in this country. Thomas Jefferson was 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. I think it's going to take somebody whose best days in life are still ahead to see a country whose best days are ahead of itself. And I think I can reach that next generation better than anybody else in this race.
Thank you. Response. Megan. First of all, we weren't bankrupt when I left the UN. We're people of service. My husband is in the military, and I served our country as UN ambassador and governor. It may be bankrupt to him, but it certainly wasn't bankrupt to us.
All right, I just want to clear this up for a second. Russell, did you want to hit something?
City hands, Mr. Hooper. Counting money all your life.
Because you told me you were going to pause it, so I was waiting for you.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you meant at the very end of the whole clip or when I paused it. Sorry. We should have worked that out in rehearsal, I suppose. But I guess it was a spontaneous decision.
That's why you have tech.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's why
in the clip version, I'll cut out.
We didn't have Tech Week.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't have Tech Week. She says we weren't bankrupt. In my research vetting that claim, I couldn't find anything where she legally filed for bankruptcy. So perhaps bankrupt was, too loose a term for Vivek to have used there. But she did have significant debt after working at the UN, and it seems like her debt was far more than she had available to pay off at the time. So she definitely had a negative net worth coming out of the UN. Whether she technically filed for bankruptcy, it doesn't seem like she did, but she was deep in debt. Her net worth was in the red, and now it's obviously in the black by $8 million. So just to clear that up, that's probably what she's talking about there.
Well, yeah, and that's a great line of attack because you're going to find this with all of these people. And Nikki Haley is particularly a product of that, and the free speech issues that he's bringing up. Yeah, she's a terrifying figure. I mean, she is very much the creature of the military intelligence forces that are trying to take control of the internet. And the shit libs, look, if she were the nominee, I would say she'd get 30% of Democratic voters.
No, she is angling for them. Her theory of the case is the Republican base is going to be so disgusted by Biden and so terrified of a second Democratic term that they'll just fall in line behind me anyway. And her theory of the case is that she can peel off those affluent, moderate conservatives who went for Biden last time. And she's probably right. If she got to the general election, she would get a lot of them and she would beat Biden by a landslide. The problem is she's fucking Democrats, awful. The problem is she's a monster.
Well, and that's why she'd get the Democrats, because substantively, how much different are her politics from Hillary Clinton's? I mean, not really. I can't think of anything that she's to the right of Hillary Clinton on.
I mean, on the domestic side, certain, issues of choice and things like that. Right.
How much? Right? Because she herself said, okay, if you had Hillary Clinton running in this moment, you don't think she'd be offering a 15-week compromise? I mean, that's what she'd be pitching. If she were running right now, post-Dobbs, we can't work towards something that's never going to happen. We need the compromise. That's what you'd be hearing from her. She would probably, if Hillary Clinton were running right now, she would probably be almost indistinguishable in terms of her positions from Nikki Haley.
Secondly, I did serve on the board of Boeing. I did a lot of work with Boeing when I was governor. They were a great partner to me. I served for 10 months. And then when they decided after COVID that they wanted to go for a corporate bailout, I've never supported corporate bailout, so I respectfully stepped back and got off the board. I love Boeing. They build good commercial airplanes. They build airplanes for our Air Force. I am proud of them. They employ a lot of people in South Carolina. But that's why I left the Boeing board.
They kill people by not revealing flaws in their engineering.
And in terms of these donors that are supporting me, they're just jealous. They wish that they were supporting them, but I'm not going to sit there and deny
Let me get the governor in.
And
Vivek, he wrote a book talking about ESG and these woke corporations and BlackRock. The idea that I want to do that in Florida, they were managing our part of our pension, and then when they did the ESG, I took $2 billion away from BlackRock. We took action. This ESG, they call it environment. So
if you're the cameraman, you can't knock your ass into the camera while Ron DeSantis is talking, because he already has the bobblehead thing going when he talks, and then when you start knocking it from side to side, it's like you're in a fun house watching this.
Somebody's fired.
Yeah, somebody's fired. Do that when the other people talk.
Florida,
you can't do that with him.
They were managing our part of our pension, and then when they did the ESG, I took $2 billion away from BlackRock. We took action. This ESG, they call it environment, social governance, and again, Nikki is meeting with all these people. They want to use economic power to impose a left-wing agenda on this country. They want basically to change society without having to go through the constitutional process. We've kneecapped it in the state of Florida. The next president of the United States needs to be able to go to that office on day one and end ESG. And the fact of the matter is, we know from her history, Nikki will cave to those big donors when it counts. And that is not acceptable.
I did write that book, Ron, and the irony is Nikki Haley was heaping praise on me when I wrote that book, but now I worry. I was warning about the woke industrial complex in this country as a warning. Apparently, she read it as a how-to manual, just like she reads George Orwell's books as well. And so I think that that's actually far more dangerous than, this is really important for people to understand. We're marching towards fascism under Biden. Jack Smith has subpoenaed every last retweet that someone has issued from Donald Trump in the year 2020. The only person more fascist than the Biden regime now is Nikki Haley, who thinks the government should identify every one of those individuals with an ID. That is not freedom. That is fascism. And she should come nowhere near the levers of power, let alone the White House.
So what's also interesting about that clip,
processor, learning computer.
what's also interesting about that clip is the difference between DeSantis and Ramaswamy. They obviously tag teamed her a little bit on the woke stuff, the ESG stuff at the end. But you see Ramaswamy's critique is so much deeper. It affects, so many more like majoritarian issues like surveillance and speech and war and peace. Right. Whereas DeSantis can't come off of the wokeness and the DEI and the ESG. He went after her for the gender affirming care for minors. That was like the first shot across the bow that he fired at the beginning of the debate. And it's not that those issues don't help you, especially in a statewide race. They will drive turnout in certain counties, in certain states, right? It's just that I said this at the very beginning of the campaign when DeSantis's stock was trading a little higher in the immediate aftermath of the midterms, where he did very well and most of the other Republican statewide candidates didn't. I said those issues can work for him, but you can't run a national campaign on those issues alone. You need a broader message.
Well,
and
not
Vivek
in these circumstances.
Vivek brings that with the war and peace critique, with the surveillance critique, with the censorship. DeSantis doesn't really have any of that. He only has those niche issues that, yes, will drive turnout among suburban moderates, and that's important, but it's not enough. It's insufficient, and that's why his campaign has mostly been a failure to launch thus far.
I think he's also, even in those respects, gone too far. People have started to see him as dangerous, which
the abortion thing in Florida was huge. Was a huge misstep. Yeah.
I mean, too many of his positions have gone beyond moderate.
Right.
Yeah, sure. Like, I thought that what he did with the universities down there was a net plus for him. But it's kind of like Giuliani. Giuliani was very popular his first term as mayor. That's why he got a second term. By the time he left office, people hated him.
Yeah.
Hated him because he did all those things that moderates wanted him to do, and then he didn't know where to stop. So by the end of his term, he's cracking down on museums for degenerate art. Right. He's cracking down on street artists for he's cracking down on hot dog vendors. It's New York. It's not Sheboygan. Nobody wants a mayor going after the museums for degenerate art in New York fucking City. So it's kind of like that. He did a lot of things in Florida that were popular with moderates, and he didn't know where to stop. He just kept going. But in terms of just that thing, raw political skill, Vivek is the only one I see who has it.
Yeah, indeed. All right, we're going to do Title IX next, but let's take some super chats before we get to that. We got Nocturnal Human. Cornel West is a jazz-off politician. That's funny. Good one. Thank you. This guy Warren is really, I hope your microphone is working on Sunday, because if you call in, Warren is really digging in on the Elvis is Jewish. Really believes that. That's a cause for you, apparently. Well,
you know what? I've never actually looked this up, and I keep meaning to, because just knowing the history of the country, and particularly the history of that region, I am assuming that Elvis is probably descended from the Scotch-Irish indentured servants. But I wonder if anybody's ever dug into his family history like that.
Interesting. Warren posted something on Locals about it, which I haven't gotten a chance to watch, but maybe I'll send it to you, so you are prepared for the most epic of debates on the Sunday Q&A. Is Elvis Jewish? Kuznetsky was saying, thanks for the $4.99.
Okay, I mean that. We could have a field day photoshopping, with the big high in the Las Vegas jumpsuit.
Kuznetsky was saying, thanks for the $4.99. Did you do a segment on Jackson Hinkle's interview with The Whale Unleashed on UK Talk TV? No, we did not. I know Jimmy did, and it was great.
Yeah.
And so I, encourage people to go and watch that, because that was a real fun one. And he had Jackson on for it to sort of do play-by-play on the replay. Eat Hot Chip and Lie, thanks for the £5. Figured out why I know Mark Regev. He was the ghoul that defended Israel on Channel 4 when they bombed boys playing football on a beach in 2014. Would not surprise me.
I mean, that sounds like his work.
Sounds like him. Yes, indeed. Dave Dillerai, thank you for the $10, my friend. Watched The Mission last night on National Geographic. For all those interested, it really is a lesson about the dangers of an indigenous rejection of Western chauvinism. Love, Glenn. Great interview. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that.
Interesting.
Appreciate that very much. Eric Housseau. I hear IDF ask lawyers before every bombing. Sparky. Oh, Sparky's here. Hey, Sparky, you're late today. What happened? We need you here.
Here we go. Make it rain, Sparky. Make it rain. Mo money, mo money, mo money.
We need you here all show every time. FYI, Vivek's an establishment plant. He was in a town hall meeting as a questioner of Pete Buttigieg. Yeah, we covered that a while back.
We've seen that, yeah.
A few presidential elections ago, Sabby Sabs had the clip on her show in the past few months. Yeah, we showed that too. I don't think we clipped that segment for some weird reason, but we did feature that in one of our
I didn't say I'm voting for Vivek. I said that he's got the most political skill of anyone on that stage.
Right, got the most talent.
I'm Dave Chappelle has my vote.
Yeah, so far that's looking pretty good.
Again.
Nikki's an establishment hag, says Sparky, financially or morally bankrupt. Well, I was going to say yes. She definitely is spiritually bankrupt and morally bankrupt. I don't think she was technically financially bankrupt, but she was in debt for more than she had on hand. I know she had a negative net worth coming out of the UN. Okay, let's do Title IX. Russell, do you want to set this up and then we have some video to play?
Okay, so the Biden administration is looking to redefine Title IX so that gender identification qualifies you as a woman. Now, this week they had convened a congressional hearing about this. Now, we haven't covered this subject in a while because, as we said in our previous show, genocide, women's sports, right? But it is an issue that I have spoken out about. We have spoken out about how unfair this is to women. Jimmy recently retweeted a montage that I did of Emma Vigeland giving the most batshit insane take on women's sports you could possibly imagine. I gotta say, if we had had more time with Glenn, I would have gotten into this. I am more and more saying a lot of this is so crazy that it's got to be a psyop. I just, because you have people with education sitting there saying things, as you'll see in the clip, like, yeah, this stereotype that women are slower and not as strong as men. Stereotype? What in God's name are you talking about? It's so crazy that it's hard to explain it by any means other than that this has been a psyop by military intelligence to make people fight over absurdities. So I cut together some segments of both sides of this debate, and we'll talk about it.
Sorry. people who watch my eyes, I went, whoa, I gave a real face there because I almost navigated away from the StreamYard. I almost like left the studio. That would have been a disaster.
That would have been bad.
That would have been not good.
Don't cross the streams.
Believe me, not good. No, I almost, how when you can hit the back on your browser, that would have fucked everything up, and I almost did it.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Administration proposed rule redefines sex to include gender identity and expand Title IX protections to biological males. Protections that were created and implemented for women and girls.
It's disappointing to me that although the title of this hearing implies a much needed discussion, we're likely going to be forced to listen to transphobic bigotry.
It is my sincere
hope. Sorry. My
Although
Pillow, everybody. We have a new sponsor on our show, My Pillow.
Keep it paused, though, because actually I want to set this up. All right, so understand what you're about to see. I cut it to get to the point. This goes on for quite a bit longer.
It's a montage.
Yeah, but no, this particular section, because this got the most press out of this. So Riley Gaines, if you know her, if you've seen her, she's a champion swimmer who was really the first to take the lead speaking out against Leah Thomas swimming. And she talks about how, the women on the team were given no warning. All of a sudden, they've got a 6-foot, fully intact male in their locker room, and they're not allowed to complain or say anything about it. And she talks about how Thomas went from, I think he was ranked 432 as a man, and all of a sudden he becomes a champion swimmer as a woman, and we're supposed to believe that this is because he trained really hard. So, she talks about that. But Summer Lee says, we're going to hear transphobic bigotry. And so, she kind of throws it back at her. And Summer Lee, like a typical, I must say, Democrat, a lot of this reminded me of the free speech hearings with Taibbi and Schellenberger, where, their constant appeals are to safety, to propriety, to someone's being hurt. They can't just have an honest conversation. So Summer Lee wanted her statement stricken. So there's this long pause because of that.
Of this hearing implies a much needed discussion. We're likely going to be forced to listen to transphobic bigotry.
It is my sincere hope that members of this committee will take action to stop the Biden administration's illegal and administrative rewrite of Title IX. Of course, there is a place for everyone, regardless of gender identity, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of race or what sports you play. There's a place for everyone to play sports in this country. But unsafe, unfair, and discriminatory practices towards women must stop. Inclusion cannot be prioritized over safety and fairness. And Ranking Member Lee, if my testimony makes me transphobic, then I believe your opening monologue makes you a misogynist. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaines. I now recognize Ms. Perry for her opening statements.
Madam Chair, I move to have the gentlewoman's words taken down.
Okay, so that was the Riley Gaines words taken down, where, she goes out of her way, and there's a reason she did that, because she probably figured, if I don't go out of my way to say that, yes, of course, trans people should be able to participate in sports, and of course, trans people should be treated equally. Her point was simply that where safety and inclusivity collide, you have to prioritize safety, which any institution's top priority has to be safety. That's common, right? And so that obviously didn't stop Summer Lee from trying to strip those comments from the record anyway. So that's what she was referring to there. All right, let's keep going.
The committee will suspend.
Madam Chair, she's engaging in personalities.
I don't know what the fuck that even means.
Can I just ask how it's fair to be called transphobic?
There's a
thing.
I would say men disguising themselves as women are engaging in personalities.
Order.
Yeah.
Hang on. Order. Let's
get
get a
nasty
rule.
now.
The irony is this debate about including
All right,
trans
listen to
women
this
and girls
genius.
in sports should sound familiar to anyone who has tracked the evolution of Title IX over the last 5 decades, because at its root are sexist stereotypes that equate femininity with being slower and weaker and likely unathletic. Athletes come in all shapes and sizes, and rigid enforcement of who is a woman is dangerous and only encourages further discrimination.
We've seen these same misguided misguided arguments before.
It's not a rigid enforcement. That's why it's common. Men say, "I would never hit a woman. I would hit you if you were." I'm sure you've heard men say when a woman pisses them off, "Man, boy, if you were a man, I'd sock you." But you don't do it because women are built weaker physically than men. That's just a fact.
Well, and that's why I'm starting to say some of this is so crazy. It's hard to believe that it's not somehow a psyop, because how do you get this woman? She's the head of a women's legal association or defense of women association. How do you get a trained lawyer? Like, look, I just watched Brianna talking about the Vivek segment. I mean, she's a Harvard trained lawyer comparing not giving your kids medical transition to not vaccinating them. Right? Like, how do you get intelligent people to make these kinds of comparisons? I have to start to, at this point, I'm starting to say, it's a psyop. How do you with a straight face assert that women being weaker and slower than men is a social stereotype?
Well, it's top down. I mean, look, what Jimmy says about this is that it's top down, and it is. Now, you can call that a psyop. I guess it depends how organized an effort it is, but it's definitely top down. Like, this is definitely meant, and especially the women's sports question, because the women's sports question affects so few people, yet it creates so much oxygen in the debate. Right. That's the trademark of a psyop. You get people arguing over something that ultimately is of very, very little consequence to the vast majority of people. Let's keep going.
It's of consequence to who it's of consequence to, though, and it's an assault on reality. That's where it becomes very significant to me. It's an assault on our ability to agree on just basic reality. And I was talking to Tusker about this before we did the segment, and she made a point. I had never really thought about framing it that way, but she made a very good point. So if men are not stronger than women, why have men dominated women for all these millennia? Like, how did that happen?
Well,
in all these places? Like, why?
I mean, you don't have to. I mean, yeah, that's a I guess a good point, but I mean, it's self-evident that men are built bigger and stronger.
Well, of course. I mean, that's what's so maddening about all of this. And Summer Lee here, well, you'll see for yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah. False stereotypes when athletes of color tried to integrate white sports leagues who were accused of taking away opportunities from white athletes. Black women
exactly
in sports,
the same
whether
thing.
they are cis, trans, or intersex, constantly encounter shifting rules and expectations as a reprimand for their success. They are accused of doping or cheating in order to win. People make cruel remarks about their perceived femininity and create racist depictions of their physicality, all in attempts to discourage and exclude them from competing, and ultimately to keep them from winning. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now.
Okay, dingbat. Racial differences are superficial. It is not in any way, shape, or form the same thing. Why do we have women's leagues, genius? Like, why did that even develop? Why did you need women's leagues in the first place? Why didn't we just make all sports co-ed? Because there is a fundamental difference. You're comparing a superficial difference upon which racist discrimination was applied, and trying to apply it to this. And these are the kinds of just insane arguments that you hear from people in favor of this, and very dishonest arguments. It really tells you how weak their argument is, that they have to fall back on things like that just clearly make no sense.
I went into Oberlin as a fairly liberal person. I still love everyone and support everyone, no matter who you want to be.
Let me just explain who she is. So she was a coach at Oberlin who spoke out against having trans women in women's sports. And, they basically put her through a struggle session. Her own students attacked her. And I think she had tenure. She was an award-winning coach. But under all of that pressure, eventually, I think she was forced to resign.
Who you want to decide you want to present as. There are extreme differences in the biology of men and women. I've experienced it as an athlete and a coach. and a parent. As an athlete, I chose to play co-ed field hockey as an adult. My worst injury I've ever had came from that. A man fell on top of me when I fell this way. I'm 5'4", maybe 120 pounds, soaking wet. I haven't ever been bigger except when I was pregnant. When he fell on me, 2 of my ribs popped off of my sternum. Those are the kind of injuries, and what happened to Peyton McNabb has recently happened to another high school athlete in California whose dad is too afraid to say anything. And this cancel culture, what's happened is kids are too afraid to say anything. Parents are too afraid to say anything. Coaches are in massive fear of losing their jobs. Professors are in massive fear of losing
all for standing up for women.
Yes.
All right. Now, the issue here is that, you look at an argument that Summer Lee is making and you say, wow, how is this not a massive gift to the Republican Party? Right? I mean, you're handing Republicans, women's privacy and women's rights. But really, when you look at this issue, and this was proven in the midterms, and it's been proven since, hasn't hurt Democrats at the polls at all, because the Republicans hand this issue right back to the Democrats on a silver fucking platter with their insane anti-reproductive rights shit. Like, you can't make an argument for women's privacy rights or women's safety when you're passing heartbeat bans in all these big states, where if a woman has an atopic pregnancy, which is basically an unviable pregnancy, they have to worry, is the state going to believe that the pregnancy is unviable? And if not, am I going to go to jail? Is the doctor going to go to jail? Like, the Republican Party is just handing Democrats cost-free virtue signaling, because that's what this is. This is just pandering. But in this case, it's cost-free because they know that on the issue that affects I won't say a majority of women, but far more women than trans sports, it's been proven time and time again that voters trust Democrats with those fundamental privacy rights more than the GOP. So it's really just shocking incompetence on both the Democrats' part and the Republicans' part, but the Republicans are just not making Democrats pay a price for this.
You're right. Most of the arguments were extremely dishonest. Like AOC, I didn't bother to include that in it, but AOC, very often they will try to fall back on what it would take to establish what sex someone is, and they try to make that very unsavory. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about forced genital examinations of minors? Very AOC tack to take. But more effectively, they all talked about what you're saying, and not just abortion, because I think a lot of conservatives would say that is care for women. I don't agree with that, but that would be their argument. But then what do you say about refusing to sign the Violence Against Women Act? What do you say about that? And they brought that up. Most of them, I think, Summer Lee and AOC brought up that issue. So we're supposed to believe,
if were a varsity sport, maybe the Republicans would take an interest in preventing it or putting some fairness there.
Right. And you're absolutely right. That is why it does play. That's the best defense the Democrats have, because clearly on the facts of this particular issue, their views are completely batshit insane. But they can always throw back at the Republicans. Well, why does it take this for you to care about women? Why don't you care about women in this case, this case, this case, this case? And they're right. You're right. I mean, the Republicans throw it right back to them.
Yeah, and, you talked about this being a psyop, being top-down, being intentionally divisive, and to me there are two sort of hallmarks of that both sort of check boxes on this issue. Number one, just kind of patently absurd, just this assault on reality, this Orwellian, war is peace, ignorance is strength kind of thing, where now we're debating whether or not men are stronger physically than women. Like that's not a debate. That's been established fact for thousands of years.
And presenting it as a ridiculous stereotype with just absolute assurance, the way she said that.
Sure.
These are stereotypes. What the fuck are you saying? Are you listening to yourself?
Right, but the other part of it too is that it's a problem, much like immigration is unsolvable under the current system. This is kind of one of those problems that is very difficult to solve because, as Riley Gaines said, you do want trans people to be able to participate in sports. And so what do you do? Do you create a transgender league? That would be the obvious solution. Then again, there aren't enough transgender people where you could really make that happen.
Transgender
logistically.
athletes, yeah.
I mean, what are you going to be driving 350 miles for a swim meet because they're going to be spread apart, right? Because you're not going to be able to organize teams of trans people if there aren't that many of them. So it becomes a difficult question, and that's also part of why the debate rages on, because the solutions are difficult because it's such this weird issue that was sort of jammed into the public from where? That's where the PSYOP questions come in, right? From where did this issue spring? Now, the other question is, if you are going to have, trans women participate in sports, the other element of this that strikes me as kind of misogynistic is, why are you making women compete against people who are stronger than them? Why do women have to show the tolerance to compete against people who are stronger than them? Why not make the men be tolerant and have the trans woman who has the muscle mass of a man compete against the men, right? That's one. Now, you could say that if people are on hormones, they're not as strong, so they can't really compete against men either. Like, it's difficult. I don't study this issue very closely, partly because I think it is a PSYOP, and I think the best way to feed a PSYOP is to harp on it all day, every day, which is what a lot of these channels do, right?
Well, you have whole channels where this is their thing,
right? But it is a tough one, and part of the reason it's a tough one is it's because it's this very niche issue that has been thrust into mainstream debate while World War III is brewing on two burners, while 90% of all new income is concentrated amongst the top 1% of earners. That is suspicious. Yeah, absolutely, it's suspicious.
Yes, I think so. At the same time, and this is what I always say, yeah, it's a trap, but that's what makes it such a great trap. But
it's not that great a trap. It's really not. Like, it's not a great trap because the Republicans have not been able to take advantage of this.
Well,
they really haven't.
Well, no, I mean, it's a great trap for drawing our attention. Because hey, I have a basic sense of fairness, and that's why this bothers me. I didn't cut in any of that, but they talked a lot about how women are denied scholarships, they're denied awards, they're denied places on teams. And you're talking about these women have trained their whole life for this opportunity. And you hear a lot from the other side about, the psychological toll on trans people. What about the psychological toll on women and girls who are basically being told that they have to take a back seat to this, as you point out, niche issue? And this is where, in a lot of ways, we're just this very juvenile society. Just like we had to lock down every child because of a very, very minuscule minority of children that might have gotten the coof, right? All the children had to be locked down. Like, we were never able to do a cost-benefit analysis on it. Okay, so say that it's bad for the small minority of trans people not to allow them to play in women's sports. And I do think there are other solutions, but suppose that. Is that worth destroying women's sports for all women for? Is that worth
it's funny.
Risking the health and safety of women? She mentioned McNabb. This is a girl who's partially paralyzed now because she took a spike to the head in a volleyball match against a trans athlete. And, she got hit in a way that would never happen with a female athlete. They just can't hit a ball with that force.
Well, in sports that are contact sports, not that volleyball is really a contact sport, but when you're, throwing a ball or hitting a ball at
if you get it spiked in your head, yeah.
If it's spiked in their head, but like you have swimming, you have track, you have sports where it's not so much a safety issue as a fairness issue. One thing that Emma Vigeland said in that little monologue she went on is that she doesn't care about fair play. And maybe a solution, maybe one solution, just sort of spitballing, is have a league for people who just want to play recreationally and don't care if they're denied a scholarship.
That would be my solution. And you do have that. You do have co-ed.
Right. Like a co-ed scrimmage league where, hey, we just like to play. We like to swim. We like to run. We like to play this or that sport. We are not looking to make a career out of it. We don't have ambitions for scholarships and, anything. And at that point, let everybody play.
Sure.
And then you have like the competitive leagues, like the leagues of where the kids who are really gunning for scholarship to this and that, just do that. Have the inclusive
100%.
local league where anybody can go and fine, knock yourself out, who cares? And then have the competitive league.
And you will have enough of the people who on principle want to show their support for trans people in sport that you'll have some people who will join that.
Of course, yeah.
And I was going to say that if you didn't. 100% that would be my solution, because you already do have this. You already do have some open sports teams. And that's it. That's it. And that is your compromise. Is it a perfect solution? No, it's not a fucking perfect world. Sorry.
Well, there is no perfect solution. This is what I mean. Like the immigration problem, like under neoliberalism, under a system where 90% of new wealth is concentrated in the hands of 1% of earners, you can't have a humane immigration system under that dynamic. You have to change the dynamic. So that's where that becomes a psyop too, right? That becomes a method of control because they're forcing us to argue about an unsolvable problem.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
All right, cool. We got one more segment to do, which we promised everybody and have been wanting to do it for a while. So we're running a little long, but that's okay. Let's do some super chats first. Derek P., thanks for the $10. The baby boomers' last stand, the next realignment, the old guard is dying, and the fourth turning is here. Get some popcorn and get in your bunker. Yeah, scary times for sure. Sparky, thanks for the $5. Vivek's vying to be Trump's next establishment plan VP, like Mike Pence. I don't think Trump's going to pick Vivek. I think he's going to pick like a Kristi Noem type. Like he'll pick a woman, I think. That's my guess.
You never know. You never know with him, man. He's very unpredictable that way.
No, you never know. I mean, it's just a guess. But thank you. Bill Voigt or Vogt, thanks for the $10. Appreciate that. Sparky says Elvis's paternal great-grandmother. Hey, man, you never know what's going to become an issue, you know? Elvis's paternal great-grandmother's husband, a Williams, left her suddenly. She changed her name back to her maiden name, Presley. In anger, she changed her 4 children's last names to Presley, too. Interesting.
So what was it originally? Shlomo? Like what are you trying to say?
Rubenstein.
It was
Hylaxu Gola, thank you. Thanks for the $5. I'm sorry if I messed that name up. I am most definitely rooting for Trump Vivek 2024 for most entertaining of the potential tag teams going forward. That would be an entertaining race. I mean, could you imagine Vivek versus Kamala at a
I was just going to say
debate?
he would flay her.
Yeah. Yeah.
He would take her apart piece by piece. Kamala would just be left. Well, you know.
Exactly.
It's a debate.
This is interesting. I believe trans dogma is a psyop as well as all this UFO nonsense. Yeah, the UFO nonsense.
So I've heard some people say that about UFOs.
Oh, they're aliens here. So what? I'm the only one who doesn't really care. Like, unless they're doing something to like get my attention, what the hell do I care if an alien landed here 75 years ago or however many years back?
I mean, I've heard Domino's Pizza is a front for the aliens.
Colonial Times, says Sparky. Thanks, Sparky. Many whites were slaves, not indentured servants. Racist historians included them as indentured servants in the late 1800s to put them as historically superior to blacks. Why don't they say...
I would have to research that. I've never come across that.
We don't say this with glee, says Eat Hot Chip and Lie. I like that name. Thank you for the 10 pounds. It is what it is. Most women are physically weaker than most men. It's why we resort to emotional and psychological damage. Yeah. I mean, it's just known. I mean, it's obvious. Here we go. There are no rules, says RBH fam, preventing biological women from playing in the NFL, NBA, MLB, or NHL. Apparently, they just choose not to make millions of dollars doing so. Right.
And this is a point a lot of people will make. Well, if this is really just about trans people wanting to play sports and not about a certain very small minority of trans people wanting to win competitions that they could never win in their birth sex, why don't we see it the other way? Where are all these trans men trying to compete against biological men? Why don't you see it that way? If it's not about that.
It's women's sports, and that's where it's more of a safety issue too, obviously. I don't know if Elvis has any Jewish ancestry or not. He's a distant cousin, not a big deal. Many of us Southerners are related before air conditioning. Not a lot of new blood moved here. So you're a Southerner, Sparky. Interesting. Thank you. 2 + 2 is 5. It's the new law. Yes, thank you, George. Appreciate that. Okay, we have some more super chats and Rumble rants to read, but I do want to do one final segment here before we bid you farewell this morning. Thank you guys very much for being here. Please hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button here on YouTube. Hit that follow button over there on Rumble. We have 518 of you in here as of 11:15, so that's beautiful. Thank you guys so much. Okay, this was a report that came out. Doctors Without Borders put this up on their website regarding an incident that happened in mid-November. MSF, which is, Médecins Sans Frontières, which is, the French version of Doctors Without Borders, convoy attacked in Gaza. All elements point to responsibility of the Israeli army. On November 18th, 2023, an MSF evacuation convoy came under fire in Gaza City. 2 people were killed in what immediately appeared as a deliberate attack against clearly identified MSF cars. Both were family members of MSF staff. One of them was also a volunteer supporting MSF medical teams at Al-Shifa Hospital. 2 weeks later, after collecting the testimonies of MSF staff present that day in the convoy, MSF considers that all elements point to the responsibility of the Israeli army for this attack. MSF has also collected testimonies of the destruction of 5 MSF vehicles and the severe damage caused to the MSF clinic in Gaza City, all clearly identified by the organization's logo on the 20th of November, which can also be attributed to the intervention of an Israeli bulldozer and a heavy military vehicle. These vehicles were potential evidence in case of an independent investigation on the attack of the MSF convoy. Shots were aimed at the MSF facilities where these colleagues were sheltering, leaving bullet holes in the interior walls. On the 24th, MSF staff also witnessed the destruction of a minibus, also clearly identified by the organization's logo, by an Israeli tank. This minibus had been sent by the MSF team in South Gaza following the destruction of the vehicles a few days before to facilitate the evacuation of colleagues in the north. MSF condemns again in the strongest term the attack on its convoy and extends again its condolences to the families of the victims. MSF requested a formal explanation for this attack from the Israeli authorities and calls for an independent investigation to establish the facts and the responsibilities. The staff and family members who went through this ordeal had been trapped in MSF facilities amid heavy fighting with no electricity and limited access to food and water for almost 2 weeks before they were able to evacuate to the south of the Gaza Strip on the 24th of November. These are their words recorded between the 26th and the 29th. On 18th of November, the MSF office in Jerusalem obtained the authorization for us to evacuate from the Gaza office and guest house to the south of the Gaza Strip. We collected our things and everyone got in the cars, ready to go south along Salah al-Din Street. We arrived at the checkpoint of Salah al-Din Street. I was in the 4th van. There were Israeli troops standing there, and they asked us to move back to where we came from because there was no authorization. Okay. Now, here, I'll do a couple more cards and then I'll interject that. On November 18th, an MSF convoy of 5 cars, all clearly identified by their logos, left the MSF premises, guest house, office, and outpatient, headed to southern Gaza to reach a safer place. Since the 11th, they had been trapped by ongoing fighting around them, and since then, MSF had repeatedly called to safely evacuate them. MSF had informed both parties to the conflict of this evacuation movement. The convoy followed the itinerary indicated by the Israeli army and reached Salah al-Din Street along with other civilians trying to leave the area. So there's the map, okay? They leave their headquarters there and they head south, and there's a checkpoint here. This is something that, Mark Regev won't tell you. He told Jake Tapper, well, it's a relatively simple process fleeing south. No, they have checkpoints along the way. Now, the only reason they were able to bring anything at all is because they had vehicles, right? They wouldn't be able to carry stuff on foot if they had to carry all of this shit. So they reach a checkpoint, and then the convoy reached the last checkpoint near Wadi Gaza, which was overcrowded at that time due to extensive screening of Palestinians by Israeli forces. Despite the prior authorization from the Israeli authorities, the convoy wasn't allowed to cross the checkpoint and was left waiting for hours. Again, relatively simple, says Mark Regev. Just move south. No, they weren't allowed through. Despite the prior authorization, the convoy wasn't allowed to cross and was left waiting for hours. Shots were later heard by our staff, who out of fear decided to head back to the MSF premises, sorry, excuse me, around 7 kilometers north of the checkpoint. Took a Marco Rubio water break there, sorry.
Yeah, you gotta lean out awkwardly for that, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got to awkwardly lean out. We stayed there around 3 hours. It was getting dark. Hundreds of people were waiting, and some of them decided to head back north because the checkpoint would not let them through. Could you imagine this? I mean, look at the hell that this is. So now they have to go back into the danger zone because they're being told to evacuate, but too many people are complying. That's the problem they ran into, it seemed. Too many people were complying with the evacuation order faster than the Israeli authorities could process them and allow them through into southern Gaza, which is the supposed safe zone, which now is no longer a safe zone. So then they had to go back. My colleagues in the car said, let's go back. Only our shelter is the MSF Gaza office. We contacted Paul, an MSF colleague in Jerusalem, to inform him that we would head back because we were not allowed to pass the checkpoint. He said he would ask for the authorization for us to go back. On their way back, between 3:30 and 4 p.m. local time, the convoy was attacked in Al-Wahida Street near the junction of Said Allah Street, near the MSF office. Sorry if I'm butchering those names. 2 of the MSF cars were deliberately hit, killing a nurse who volunteered with MSF teams and injuring the family member of another who later also died from his wound. When we arrived in Al-Wahida Street, which is close to our office and guest house, I saw tanks and snipers at the tops of the buildings. I was terrified when I saw that the snipers and the tanks were pointing their weapons at us, especially at the 4th and 5th van in the convoy. They started opening fire at us, and when a bullet grazed my forehead, I got a superficial injury. The bullet hit my colleague Allah in the head. He sat next to me. He got a critical head injury and started bleeding massively. His head fell on the steering wheel, and I immediately retook control of the steering to move to the right of the street. We arrived at the clinic, and we started to try to give Allah life support, trying to stop the bleeding from his head. We couldn't do anything. He died while we were trying to support him and to save his life. I stopped at the entrance and waited for the last 2 vans to come. People were saying that one of us had been killed, and his name was Allah al-Shawa. We stood up, just shocked by his death and all that had happened to us. I was speechless and just not able to think. My kids were crying, and people were discussing how to bury our colleague, and we had another person injured in the abdomen. I just want to show some of these images here of these vehicles hit, clearly with the logos. You could see.
I mean, it's not, yeah, how could you think it was anything else?
How could you think it was anything else? You actually had some assholes on X saying, nobody believes you anymore, meaning Doctors Without Borders. Really, Doctors Without Borders have the reason to lie about this. They have time to, Photoshop these images onto their vehicles? You can see right there, MSF. 2 days later, after the convoy
Doctors
attack,
Without Borders, very sus.
Yeah, exactly. People who literally put themselves in the line of fire, literally, in this case, for no other reason but to help people who are in desperate need. Yeah, they're photoshopping their logos onto vans and trucks. So because there's no way Israel knew that they were firing on these cars. A bulldozer clearing the way for Israeli tanks came and damaged our cars and threw them away from the right and the left side of the street. I was witnessing this from the window upstairs at the Gaza clinic. Out of the stairs window, we saw an Israeli bulldozer. Sorry, I got to take this logo off. A tank next to it, and behind it, there were 4 or 5 vehicles, tanks, and tracked vehicles. They were moving and firing, and the shooting was heavy. So there you can see another piece of photo evidence, very, very clearly, very, very obvious. There's pictures of the ruins there. When the bulldozer pushed aside the cars, the western wall of the clinic fell apart. Then the tank came and opened fire toward the MSF cars and vans. The MSF vans caught fire. I was inside. The fire and the smoke came inside. We stood there thinking about how to stop the fire, so we moved the children and the women through the back doors to the other building where MSF has the physiotherapy department. I mean, this is just absolute hell. I mean, look at what these people do. You know, if we do a charity event, it should be for Doctors Without Borders. We should do some kind of fundraising thing.
Not a bad idea.
For them.
I've been thinking about trying to use our platform for good.
I mean, this would be a great organization to support if you guys want to go and support an organization. We closed the doors and got inside, so the tanks were in the street. Outside the clinic, they kept coming back and forth for 4 days. The morning of the next day, around 10 o'clock, we started shouting to check on our other colleagues to know if they were alive or dead. I did not know. Thank goodness someone replied and said they were unhurt and were also worried about us. Sorry, got one more slide here that I want to read. As the only vehicles available to the staff and their family members had been destroyed, our teams based in the south of the Gaza Strip sent more vehicles to Gaza City to attempt another evacuation. However, they were also hit by bullets while approaching the MSF clinic, and the movement was canceled. Later, they too were destroyed by the Israeli forces in the early hours of the 24th of November. Eventually, our colleagues and their families were able to reach the south once the truce came into effect on the morning of the 24th, thanks to the vehicles of other civilians evacuating, because they had no means to evacuate now because their vehicles had been lit on fire, had been shot up, had been blown up. MSF requested a formal explanation for this attack from the Israeli authorities and calls for an independent investigation to establish the facts and the responsibilities. We extend again our deepest condolences to the families of the victims. So this report came out about a week ago. It was a bit long, and so we didn't really have a chance to get into it until now. But this is why I wanted to, because when you have these people go on CNN and talk about how simple it is to evacuate south, this is always a part of the story that you never know. Nothing is ever as simple as it sounds on TV. There's always bureaucracy to deal with, even in the most innocent of situations. And now you have a situation where these doctors, who, like I said, just put their lives on the line as a matter of routine, are trying to comply with Israeli evacuation orders. They get turned around at the checkpoint because the checkpoint is all backed up. There's a logjam at the checkpoint. They go back to shelter because they can't just sit out there for hours because it's a war zone. And they get fired upon on the way back to shelter because they couldn't get through to the south. And they submit photo evidence with MSF logos on the vans and say, how did this happen? How the fuck could this possibly happen if your goals are not genocidal in nature? How? What, you think Hamas commandeered the Doctors Without Borders? This wasn't an Al-Shifa ambulance, right? The theory is that, you know, terrorists are shacked up at Al-Shifa and they're using their stuff. This wasn't an Al-Shifa ambulance. This is Doctors Without Borders vehicles, their own vehicles with their own logos on them. So how did this happen to us if you are not trying to make this evacuation impossible, if you are not literally trying to make life impossible for the people in the north and now the south, obviously, as well? Like, this is just one more thing. It's not the only thing, obviously, but this is just a stunning example in broad daylight of how the argument that this is anything but a genocide is just absolutely absurd. First of all, why wouldn't you let the convoy through? Why would they be backed up? This is a medical convoy, right? You would think if there's a logjam, you would at least say, hey, we'll get you through here. No explanation, no nothing. It's taking forever. They can't wait because it's not safe to wait. That's the other part of the story. They couldn't just wait for hours in the middle of the street because they felt like they were a sitting duck. And guess what? They're right. They were a sitting duck because on the way back to the hospital, they got fired upon. What, did they fire upon them because they were going back? Did they think, whoa, why is a vehicle going north and not south? There must be terrorists in it. Well, because they had to go back. They had to take shelter. It's just a situation where you see the absolute brutality of this, where it is impossible to comply with Israel's wishes.
We just want to make it clear the IDF is safe and effective. This is why, unfortunately, and that was our first super chat today, I think. Your take that Gaza is not going to exist by the end of this, I mean, it already doesn't, right? I mean, they basically bombed all of Gaza into rubble, right? I mean, there's very little left standing. So what are we talking about? I have said from pretty early on, I think they're trying to create conditions where they can claim that moving the surviving Palestinians to a refugee camp outside of Gaza is a humanitarian priority, right? They're going to try, as ineffective as I think that's going to be for the PR element of it, they're going to try to say they want to move them out of feeling for the poor Palestinians who are living in rubble. But the consequences of this are that, particularly as you're starting to get a non-Western BRICS kind of alternative to Western power, Israel's going to wind up a pariah state. You're going to have more and more states that decide to divest from Israel. You're going to have more and more institutions that divest from Israel. I'm going to give these students the benefit of the doubt and say that they're going to continue pressure on these universities. Although we got into this a little bit with Glenn, because the UPenn president had that answer on genocide, they lost $100 billion fund from an organization. So we'll see how that breaks. But I don't think there's any coming back from this for Israel in terms of its standing with the international community. Because really, can you think of any government that is this absolutely amoral in broad daylight? I mean, it's certainly not at that level, at that economic and industrial level, a so-called Western country that would just straight out genocide people like that. Like, certainly we're not defenders of U.S. foreign policy here. And even the U.S., I can't imagine, would just open fire on the Doctors Without Borders like that. And then they send this scumbag Regev out there who, what kind of a ghoul do you have to be to even take that job? Like, his job is just to go in front of the Western media when they do things like this and say, no, Israel is the world's most moral army.
Right.
As they call themselves. No. This is a tragic accident. You're only seeing what Hamas wants you to see. Right. How do we know this wasn't Hamas fighters? We don't know this. We're investigating.
Right. And then that's what Doctors Without Borders said. They said, we suspect very strongly, for obvious reasons, that this was the Israeli army, but we want an investigation. That's what they're calling for. They're calling for an accounting of facts. They're calling for Israel to actually investigate this. And if they were not fired upon by the Israeli state, then Israel has a chance, according to their own statement here, to make that known. But we haven't gotten any such investigation. This piece has been out there for a week. They've been calling for this for a while. And notice not much press. That's the other reason why I really wanted to cover that. Did you hear anything on CNN about a Doctors Without Borders convoy being blown up on the way back to take shelter because the checkpoint was all backed up? Have you even heard about checkpoints heading south? I have not heard the mainstream media say anything about a checkpoint. According to the media, you get the order to evacuate south, and
you just go south. Right.
They didn't say anything about a checkpoint to get into the south. Where there's checkpoints, there's going to be log jams, especially if you're talking about evacuating the most populous part of Gaza, which is the north, 1.2 million people. So you're going to run 1.2 million people through checkpoints, and there's not going to be problems. We don't hear about that.
Right. And the geography and the population of Gaza is kind of similar to Manhattan. And I was here during during the 2003 blackout. And that was chaos. People trying to get out of Manhattan just without any bombs falling, without anyone shooting at you. Just the reality of that many bodies trying to go into a limited space. So the idea of like evacuating everyone to the south of Manhattan, it's easy for me to imagine what kind of a chaos that would create. Then you throw checkpoints into the mix. And this guy Regev, he goes on the air. No, we have asked them to go to the south.
And it's a relatively simple request. That's what it says. Relatively simple. Relatively simple. And now that they're in the south, now you have 2 million people in the south, right? Not just 800,000 in the south. Now you have 2 million, and they're bombing parts of the south. And now, as Russell said on our last show, they sort of split it up into zones, and you're supposed to now follow directions. Okay, this zone is safe at this time, this zone isn't. So if you're in this zone, move to this zone. Now you're talking about 2 million people packed into a space that's half the size of the entirety of the Gaza Strip. It's impossible. That's the moral of the story here. That's the big takeaway. What Israel is asking people to do is impossible. That's why that human rights expert, I think Francesca Albanese, I think her name was, on the segment that we covered a few weeks ago, said the very order for this many people to evacuate this quickly under these circumstances, that is an illegal order. That is an illegitimate order.
The movement of people.
The movement of people itself is illegitimate, especially under these circumstances. How many people in how small a space under the threat of attack from the sky at any second? I mean, it's just... It's a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke that anybody takes any of this at all seriously.
Well, that's it. They don't intend for it to work. It just gives them cover for genocide. It just gives them cover for telling people, no, look, we made a map. We told them where to go. We're the world's most moral army.
Exactly. All righty. Let's take some super chats and get on with our Friday here. Sparky, thanks again for the $10. Both men and women in my family, going back a couple of generations, played college sports. Title IX was once a godsend to women. Too bad it's now corrupted.
I mean, this was part of what was crazy about this hearing. It was very much like the Taibbi Schellenberger hearings because the Republicans are all the sane ones. You got the Republican woman, I forget her name, who was chairing this. I showed her at the beginning, saying, we fought so hard for Title IX to protect women and girls. Like that's a left position, right? I mean, it was just amazing.
Yep. When a two leave, Ray. According to Presley biographer Albert Goldman, Elvis wasn't even circumcised. Yeah. Warren Westell says in the black community, pardon me, man, my voice is getting scratchy. Liberal yayas like Ms. Lee are considered race traitors. Contrary to the way they're portrayed, black people are overwhelmingly conservative. Yet socially, I think only 25% of black people call themselves liberals.
I've lived in Harlem for 17 years. I was in business on a theater with a Pentecostal church around the corner. I mean, that's like the secret that the media doesn't want to tell you. Yeah, man. Go up to the average African American and say, hey, so how do you feel about your daughter sharing a locker room with someone with a cock? See what they tell you. See what they say.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. And I mean, that's true of white people, too. But there's this tendency to portray this whole thing like there's this coalition of people who are for this, and they tend to include people of color in that. And if you actually take the time to talk to people of color, they're not usually on board with that.
Well, that's because black people vote Democrat overwhelmingly, and so it's assumed that they're all liberals. But they don't actually respond to pollsters when they're asked. Only 25% of black people call themselves liberals when asked in a poll. God, my voice is fucked up. Let's get through these, and I can get some tea. Mr. Fancy Pants, thanks for the $1.99. That time of the year. That time of day, too. Probably in the morning it's a little worse because I was sleeping in a heated room, you know, all that dry air.
That's bothering me too. Like that is part of why it's taken some time for my voice to recover. It's that it's that steam
especially
heat.
In the morning shows.
It's
when
bothering
you've been
me.
For all that time. All these identities and nothing for the gamers. Yes, good. Wood. Thank you, Mr. Fancy Pants. Black Freud, thanks for the $2. They used to have the Gay Olympics. So, did they have Gay Olympics? I never heard no Gay Olympics. Yeah, I don't know. Cool Blue, thanks for the $4.99. If he does not get the VP slot, should Republicans run Vivek for U.S. Senate in Ohio to unseat Sherrod Brown? It's interesting. See, my take on Vivek is that, you know, and this is similar with Trump. Part of the reason why he's such a flamethrower is because he's not a senator. He's not a congressman. He doesn't have to go back to the office and deal with these people after he loses, right? Whereas if you do, then you tend to, you know, hold your fire a little bit.
He doesn't need a job from them in the future.
And he doesn't need them. Exactly. So, I mean, maybe he would. I get the sense that, he doesn't really strive to be a career politician. That's sort of his brand, is that he's not going to be that. We'll see. I mean, the big question is, does he get that VP nod from Trump? I suspect he won't. I don't think Trump is going to pick anyone who's running against him. I don't think so.
Well, because Trump's not going to pick anybody who could outshine him. He only picks people who are going to be dim bulbs by comparison. Vivek's too talented.
Right. Pence was picked to shore up the evangelical vote. Right. And, because there was a sense that he needed to.
And also because he's a zero. He was never going to upstage Trump.
Right. And even with Pence, I think it was one of the books that came out about the campaign. Trump was asking his aides if they could take Pence off the ticket after they had already told him he was going to be on. Like he was flying in for the announcement, and Trump's like, "Can we pick somebody else, or is it too late to pick somebody else?" They're like, "No, it's too late."
That does not surprise me. That does not surprise me.
Like that's it. We're committed.
I mean, he couldn't even deal with Bannon, who, as I have said before, if he had let Bannon be his rove, we'd be in Trump term 2 right now.
Oh yeah, no question. 007 Angelo, thanks for the $5. Glenn was right. The more time I spend here, I'm becoming an anti-Semite. Meaning I like you guys more and more. Great guest, Scott Ritter. Next, we're gonna take a break from some interviews because we've done 3 in a row.
It's been back to back to back. Yeah. Although I am in a culture. Hang on, I'll get this way. We are gonna have a guest interviewer for this. I mean, if we can get her, I'm assuming we can get her. I found the contact. She's not hard to find. But the next interview would probably be Louise Perry, and it would be me and Tusker doing that.
And that'll probably be after the new year because we're going to do some solo. Want to do some hangout shows first, unless something urgent comes up.
Which means I'd probably be doing it from L.A., actually.
That's right. Actually, you'd be doing it. Man, yeah, that hosted. Yeah,
you're doing it from Jimmy's guest house.
Russ will be guest hosting the Jimmy Dore show in, I think, 1 month from today, right? 8th to the 15th. Those are the shows.
Yep.
Dave Delarai, thanks for the $6. The mission is about that zealot missionary, John Chow, who thought he could bring the word of Jesus to the people of North Sentinel Island. He was deleted.
Oh, that screwball. Yeah.
Mosaic, thanks for the $5. Bree has been embarrassing on the Hill outside of Israel issue. She has become crystal level bad. Actually equated homeschooling to child abuse. Yeah, that was I couldn't believe it. She keeps getting dumber. Miss me with it. We should have brought that up to Katie Halper. So Bree keeps getting dumber. What do you have to say?
She keeps getting dumber. Now, is this some mind control thing? Is it the water she's drinking? What do you think it is, Katie?
Miss me with it. Thanks for the $5. Please check out these 2 things. Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov breaks down this demoralization strategy and Cloward Piven strategy regarding to migration. All right. Thank you very much. Build a better world with bricks, says Sparky. Thanks for the $2. Black Freud. If this slaughter continues, then none of us is safe. That's absolutely correct. TBTB. Thanks for those 50. What are those? We had it. Those are Norwegian dollars, right? Great show, guys. Thank you. Much respect for you considering your Jewish background. You even put our Muslim commentators to shame. Bless you, brothers. Well, thank you, TB. Appreciate the compliment.
Thank you. That's very flattering. Just to be clear, I think some people might have misinterpreted. I don't have Louise Perry yet. I haven't emailed her.
Right. He's saying he's going to try.
I'm going to try.
Let's go to some Rumble rants. We got 3 more from Warren Westdale. Apparently, Winnetou Livre hasn't read the Jewish word of Elvis Presley. Man, this is like your cause. You should start a show based on. You should write a book on Elvis Presley being Jewish. Now, Sparky's correct. Good for you, Sparky. Russell, you're way behind the curve. That was Sparky was speculating about his red. I am the ghost of Adolf Hitler. Just want to thank BB for making me look like a warm, fuzzy guy by comparison. Well, at least that wasn't about Elvis. Thank you, Warren Westdale. Appreciate it. And you should have been on the you were on the scroll. Because I know you brought to our attention that we forgot to update the scroll last time. So I hope you enjoyed seeing your name up in lights. Palaganda, love your great show. Elvis's mother, great-grandmother on her maternal side was Jewish. That's why Elvis's mother has a Jewish star on her tombstone.
Well, it's a 1 for the money, 2 for the show. 3 to get ready now. Go, cat, go.
I mean, maybe he is Jewish. What the hell do I know or care?
I listen, man. I mean, as a lifelong Elvis fan, I mean, I'm not like crazy. But when I was a kid, I was much more into Elvis, actually. But I've never heard that in my life.
They didn't mention that at the Graceland tour either, because I went on the Graceland tour.
I have never heard that in my life.
They said it. Eisenhower, a Republican. Yep, identified
Get
as
off
liberal.
my goddamn shoes!
Super sticker. Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate that. And the Koch brothers insisted on Pence, according to Sparky. Yeah, that was definitely some kind of special interest pick for sure. Alrighty, folks. That's our show for today. Thank you.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Elvis has left the synagogue.
Left the synagogue. Alrighty, folks, that is our show. We appreciate you all being here very much. We appreciate our guest, Glenn Greenwald, for making time for us this morning. Once again, you can go to patreon.com/DoDissidents to help support this project. Once we hit 500 paid members, which we're closing in on, we're going full-time, adding a fourth stream to the weekly schedule. You can go there. You can also go to dodissidents.substack.com and dodissidents.locals.com. If you're watching on Rumble, just click that join button right underneath the screen. Everybody follow us on Rumble. Even if you're watching on YouTube, go to rumble.com/dodissidents. Hit that follow button. Wherever you are, hit that subscribe button. If you're not subscribed, hit that follow button over on Rumble. If you are not following us, and we will see you guys back here on Sunday night, December 10th at 7 p.m. Eastern. We want to thank producer Jake, who was in the booth today. And I know we had some trolls in the chat during the Greenwald interview. When you get a big guest like that, trolls come in. Like when we had Jimmy on, the trolls come in. The reason we didn't block people, I blocked one of them from my phone because he was just making it impossible for people to follow what was going on.
Right.
Last time when we had that mishap on my end, it was right after Jake had banned someone from the StreamYard. So we figured I didn't want to have a technical problem with our guest here. So I did that from my phone. But there were a few trolls that I got around to blocking manually from my cell phone. But most of you guys were fantastic, as always. We love you guys, and we thank you guys very much for being here.
Yeah, as we call the trolls, Team Little Dick.
Team Little Dick. That's right.
Nobody who's fucking packing iron is sitting there on YouTube going, Glenn Greenwald. He's got a fucking Mingia Piccolo, as our Italian friends would say.
Yeah, no, we had a few, but some of them I banned. Most of them probably left after Greenwald was gone anyway, because the high profile guests are what bring them out. They don't usually troll us when we're just here, two of us.
Greenwald, let's leave the bridge. Let's get out from under the bridge and go after Greenwald. That's fucking I can't even imagine how pathetic your life would have to be to do something like that. Why would you do it? There are lots of people I don't like. You know what happens? I don't think about them.
Yeah, that's it. That's all. It's easy. Pence was tasked with keeping an eye on Trump, says Sparky. Thanks to Jake in the booth. Thanks to Glenn Greenwald for being here. Thanks to all of you for being here. We will see you again Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern. Until then, be safe and be well.
Courage.
Please clap.